and welcome to City Hall. I'm calling this meeting to order. Before we begin, we will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you please call the first item?
Approve the minutes of the special meeting February 11th, 2025, a supplement to the February 11th regular meeting minutes, and regular meeting minutes for February 18th, 2025.
Are there any items to be corrected from the minutes? I see none. I move to approve the minutes of the special meeting February 11th, 2025, as well as a supplement to the February 11th, 2025 regular meeting minutes and regular meeting of February 18th, 2025.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Public agenda. The public agenda allows for up to 5 speakers to have 5 minutes each to address the council. No action will be taken relative to items on the public agenda other than referral to the city manager for information as necessary. Speakers will please state their name and address for the record. A time clock will display the speaker's remaining time to speak. Order and rules of decorum will be observed. We do not have any scheduled speakers.
Which now means there are up to 5 individuals who can address the council. All you have to do is step forward to the podium.
Hello, my name is Henry Davis, and I will be reciting the Gettysburg Address. I live in District 1, and I'm very privileged to be here reciting this for you. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in the great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground, for the brave men, living and dead, who struggle here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world below no longer remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so far nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion, from which they gave the last full measure of devotion, and that we here, highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Thank you very much, Henry. Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Yes.
So how old are you? What grade do you attend school, and which school do you attend?
I am 9 years old. I am in 3rd grade, and I attend the Classical School of Wichita.
Next up, Declaration of Independence.
Henry, right? Henry, I just wanted to tell you, good job. That is very impressive that you memorized all of that. So very good job. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. We now have time for 4 additional individuals who would like to address their council during public agenda. I see none. We will now ask the city clerk, can you please call the next item?
Consent agenda items 1 through 26.
Are there any items to be pulled from consent?
I'd like to pull item 19.
I will also pull items 11 and 13. No additional items to be pulled? I will move to approve the consent agenda, all items without 11, 13, and 19.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6-0. We'll start with consent agenda item in numerical order 11. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning, Mayor and council members.
My question is about this project. This is a nearly $36 million project along Kellogg and Elm. Can you talk about this Bleckley Drive drainage improvement and what it aims to do and kind of a little bit of a history regarding this area?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and council members. Gary Jansen, Public Works and Utilities. Henry's a tough act to follow, but I'm going to see if I can do that. So the item before you today is some additional funding to keep this project moving forward, particularly with what's going to be the first phase of construction at the south end of the project towards Kellogg. But I did want to take the opportunity to kind of go back in time and talk about some history of why we're doing what we are with this project. So Bleckley is just east of Oliver from Kellogg up to north of Central in this area. I always tell people, if you ever have the opportunity to go stand on Bleckley at 1st or 2nd Street and look both east and west, you can see how much of a valley you're standing in. So this area, this neighborhood developed where there used to be a creek many years ago, a natural drainage way, pretty large basin that came to this area. So it doesn't take much of a rain event to create some real issues. There's been historic problems for many years. We just haven't had the opportunity to get to this point and be able to address them. So got a couple of pictures I wanted to show you and then a video if I can get it to play. So believe it or not, it has rained in the last few years in Wichita. But this wasn't even that large of an event in summer of 2023, less than a 1-inch event. You can see what happens with taking trash carts away. Water starts to get curb to curb, which really becomes a challenge for safety. And I'll talk about that more in a moment, what's happened historically over the years. Again, this was a pretty small rain event. This has happened often over the years when you see this depth of water in the area. The upper right-hand picture over the years, Wichita Fire Department, Public Works have had to put out barricades for the safety of the public to not go through the area. When you get typically 6 inches of water, we get to the bottom of most cars, where you can lose control in steering. A foot of water will float a vehicle, and then 2 feet of water, especially with the type of velocity we see in this area, there's a lot of grade from north to south, it'll start carrying vehicles away. We've seen and heard stories over the years. Don Henry, our assistant director, I know was at a meeting at one point in time and heard from a parent whose teenage daughter had a carload of friends that their car was washed away down Bleckley towards Kellogg. Luckily, it got caught up at one point, but you can imagine how scary that was for them and for the parents. Back in the 70s, there was a fatality related to the flooding. Luckily, we haven't seen a lot of that, but there's some serious issues that happen here with life safety over time, which is what we're aiming to address. I'm going to see if I can get this video to play. This is one you can Google many videos. This was 2019-ish, 2015-ish. you can imagine.
5 words you pronounce wrong 2 years before your brain starts shutting down.
Sorry.
Dementia is now becoming a new epidemic, according to the Mayo Clinic.
I kind of needed to see the 5 words.
Sorry. Let me see if I can get back to this.
That's funny. Good job. On there.
That has happened a lot over the years. So fortunately, most of the houses were built up high enough that I don't think there's been a lot of issues with flooding into the structures. But you can imagine dealing with that, especially if you've got vehicles in the street, and it's just not a safe situation at all. That happens even in some of the smaller events. So took us some time to look through many options. We got to a point of really wanting to optimize costs versus benefit. We first started looking, you've probably heard us talk over time about certain sizes of events. We talk about 100-year rain events. And we kind of started headed down that path to see if we could take on what would be the largest events. We got to a project cost that exceeded $100 million pretty quick and realized that was just not going to work. So we looked at the actual rain events in this basin over a 14-year period. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I just want you to see some of the method to how we approached this. And we started focusing on what was those 2 largest events in 2015 and 2016, what we could do for infrastructure improvements to try to really help. Because if we can handle those types of events, then the majority of rain events that happen in this basin, we're going to see so much improvement and generally not have those types of issues that you saw in the pictures in the video. This is kind of how we depict what we're going to do and what we would see for improvements. And again, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just so you know what you're looking, the top map is an aerial view, obviously, of Bleckley, of what happens now during that. We modeled that 2015 event. Over to the right, you can see this where it shows as the darker the blue gets is the deeper water. So if you just compare from top to bottom is after the proposed improvements. You can see how much lighter the blue gets. It's narrower. We're going to really make improvements with this. We've got some cool technology that we can model these events with the proposed improvements and really make a difference. Robinson Middle School is right in about the middle between Second and Central. You can see a much smaller area impacted there by the school. I know the Robinson principal said they had a new teacher just in the last couple of years that had their car totaled during a rain event. So there's a lot of those stories out there and a lot of the problems that are associated with this area. So we took a look at the U.S. Geological Survey, looks at, I mentioned, depth of water and velocity. The combination of those two becomes a real issue. And I can provide this detail to anybody if you want to see it later. This is something we talked about early on in the project. But there's a factor that's put together between depth and velocity where it starts to become really a life safety issue. That's what we wanted to combat first and foremost. So with our proposed improvements, for what it's worth, if you go to the right side, you see a lot less colored boxes. That means we're getting to a point that it's not near as risky for anybody to be involved in the area. Just talk about construction schedule real quick. Again, the item today is to provide funding to move forward with what we would call the bottom end of this project, which is just about as important as anything. It's going to take us some time to work through this project in multiple phases. We have to relocate existing water and sewer. This is a large underground structure, a large culvert that needs to go in the ground, an associated conveyance system. There's some AT&T relocation work that has to happen, some major fiber optic duct banks that serve all of East Wichita, which will be a timing factor. Right now, we're expecting that we could go all the way into 2028 with construction, but we're trying to look at multiple phases, hopefully multiple contractors, and find ways to get through this quicker, but we will be kicking off the first phase, pending your approval today, probably in the next 3 to 4 months. Total project cost, Mayor, as you mentioned, is $36 million. That's split out over 3 different years, funding from the Stormwater Utility Fund. There was a base rate increase for the stormwater utility back in 2017. We have basically been building up this fund since that point in time, hoping that we could find a way to build this project. So we're excited to get moving, ready to get first phase going. We are going to make a big difference here. and it's definitely needed. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Gary, one of the questions a community member had was, there are other areas in the city that also experience some major flooding events. Why this one rose to the top and not the other ones? And I know that 2 or 3 weeks ago, this council tried to apply for federal grants regarding another flooding concern in District 6. Unfortunately, that federal grant application is no longer available. But can you just talk about, you are still looking at the other areas of Wichita? This just became a top priority.
Sure. I think the combination of what happens during the rain events in this basin with the depth of flooding and the velocity of the water, which are two important considerations, made this really rise to the top. There's not a lot of areas that have to be barricaded as this one does in an emergency situation, even for smaller rain events. We've known, I mean, this has historically been our worst area within the community for many, many years, but the cost factor has been a big part of that, not knowing if we could ever get to that point. And when we first looked at a $100 million project, it didn't seem like it was attainable. We do know there are issues around the community. You mentioned the grant that we talked about in kind of the core area. Some of that probably could be considered a little bit more nuisance flooding. It is a problem. It is impactful to development, but it doesn't generally have the same life safety issues with it, I think, is really the big difference between Bleckley and most others. What we would like to do once we get this project moving forward and know that we've got we still don't know what the final cost is going to be. We feel good about our estimate at this point that the $36 million is sufficient. Once we get a little bit further along and know where we're at on this project, we'd like to start looking a little more holistically with the council again at flooding issues across the community and what it might take to start future funding outlook for that. So we've got some thoughts on that and some ideas. I know I've talked to generally all of you at one point in time about drainage issues within your district. So we have been developing a decision support tool that prioritizes areas based on life safety factors, based on economic impact, a variety of things, but especially public safety. And that's something we'd like to have a discussion with the council, hopefully relatively soon.
Any further questions for Gary?
Would you say Capskin would be the next big project that we would focus on, maybe the next biggest project, I guess, of this scope?
Potentially. So there's different types of flooding and drainage projects, if you will. That one is more impacting development because there's a lot of open areas there, right, by very nature of it. I think we need to start looking at where some of these fall into and as part of that overall discussion of where the focus should be next. I think it needs to be out there, but the size of that project is really going to lend itself to, in my opinion, outside funding. I just don't know that's a place we can ever get to with our current funding structure, nor probably should we.
Yeah, I know we speak to our federal delegation every year, and Capskin is always up there, so looking for any help from the outside that we can get for that expensive project.
There's some development that's beginning to happen in that area out there. KDOT is beginning an impact study for what could be a future northwest bypass. The combination of those two at some point in time may end up addressing some of that flood. It'll have to. If any type of facility like that's ever going to get built, that flooding's going to have to get addressed basically at the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. And again, this is funded by the stormwater utility, not the general fund.
Correct.
Well, I move, I see no further questions. I can't move it yet, actually. We have public comment now. So we stopped with staff questions. Are there any individuals from the public who would like to address the council regarding this item? I see none. I'll bring it back to the bench. I will move to approve the revised budget, adopt the amending resolution, and authorize the necessary signatures.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6-0. The next item is item number 13. Hi,
Good
Paul.
morning, Mayor.
Good
City Council-
morning.
Paul Gonswin, Public Works and Utilities.
I pulled this item because I had some residents in the community that did not know that sidewalks are the responsibility of the property owner. So this item in particular, can you talk about, have you seen a rise, a decrease, or a steady regarding sidewalk repairs and having to put those on the tax roll?
So I went back a few programs, starting in 2021 through 2022, and that program was in place from June of 21 through June of 22. We had approximately 90 or 80 complaints that we had received that we reviewed. We repaired approximately 90,000 square feet of sidewalk and 111 wheelchair ramps. The following year, 22 through 23, again, that same time period from June to June. Again, that was, we received 90 complaints, and again, we repaired 90,000 square feet of sidewalk and 88 wheelchair ramps. Since that time, from July of 2023 through December of 2024, so far, which is approximately an 18-month period, we have received 50 complaints. We have repaired 50,000 square feet of sidewalk and 45 wheelchair ramps to date within that program. And yes, it is per Charter Ordinance 88, it is the adjacent property owner's responsibility to repair the sidewalk along their frontage.
Does that also include snow removal?
It does, yes. Any sidewalk, yes. Maintenance.
Thank you. Any questions for Paul? I see none. We will now open it up for public comment. I see none. I'll bring it back to the bench. I again wanted to just point that information out, as some individuals in our community did not know that information. So I will move to approve the proposed assessments, place the ordinance on first reading, and authorize the necessary signatures.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6-0. Next item is consent agenda item number 19.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning.
I pulled number 19 just because it seemed a little bit unusual, and so I just wondered if you could give a brief overview.
Sure, absolutely. So this is a vacation case, and in this instance, what's happening is that the neighbor is requesting that the city would give up land that is currently in use as right-of-way. So in this area, the neighborhood was developed as a grid pattern. This is on the northern end of that neighborhood where it abuts the river. And so where the grid hits the river, we have one piece of street that has been developed as a cul-de-sac and is essentially used as just a private driveway for the adjoining neighbor. Now, what's interesting about this case is that to the north of it, there is still some undeveloped land in between the river and where the houses are located and where this right-of-way is. That undeveloped land is owned by the city. There are 3 different ways to get to that undeveloped land. It's quite a long piece of land because it's where the river bends. This is the middle portion that you can use to get to that land. There are others to the west and also to the east. And as part of the packet, I would encourage you to look at the aerial photo which is included in that packet because it gives you a better illustration of this one. So what we did with any vacation case is that we send out information to the utilities and a variety of folks. And in this case, because the land to the north is owned by the city, we also send out information about it to the park department. Now, with that said, with this case, as is typical with vacation cases, we do not typically take these to the DABs. We don't typically present these to the park board unless requested. So at this point, the only organization that's looked at this has been the subdivision committee of the MAPC and then the full MAPC. Now, there's no deadline or anything with this in terms of a time frame, but that's the circumstance. Is there any other questions that I can help address?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions for staff? I see none. We'll open it up for public comment on this item. Please go to the podium, state your name and address, and you have up to 5 minutes to speak on this item.
Stephanie Pittman, 2828 North Wild Rose Court, Wichita, Kansas, 67205. Why, if you are, and just a question, if you're considering taking away public land, especially in a neighborhood area, and giving it either to a private resident or for other use, why would you not take that to the DAB in that area and allow public comments from the neighbors? That's just an open question. To the council, I mean, what would be the public purpose for not providing transparency to this type of action?
After your 5 minutes, we'll have staff answer, but you have up to 5 minutes to continue speaking.
I think this goes to why we are all here and why we've identified some transparency issues. It's for issues like this where neighborhoods are impacted, people are impacted. This is the loss of public land, of green space, or of a right that individuals care about. And if we don't know that this is even an option, or if this is happening, or this is about to be an ordinance, I feel like the Gettysburg Address that we just heard really encompasses why we're here. It is government for the people, by the people. We want to know what happens in our community. If it's not transparently provided to us, we don't know, and we can't comment. So I would just really challenge the council. In situations like this, I noticed that there's a second one for at 151st and 21st. Also, land that's about to be ceded. Hopefully that goes before some sort of a DAB or at least community comments that is not in this where you have to see an agenda. So that's my comment.
Any further public comment? I see none. We'll have staff address.
Sure, absolutely. So I think this gets to the nature of how much public involvement, how much public comment, how much public notice. So for vacations run a wide gambit. It can be something as simple as a water line easement or a setback on a property that really just affects that individual property, all the way up to a vacation of right-of-way, which is in this instance a part of a street network that then the request is for the adjoining property owners to acquire that. Part of this goes back to the history about how right-of-way is typically acquired. Right-of-way is typically acquired from the adjoining properties. That's why if it's vacated, it goes to the properties that are adjacent to it, because that's how originally it was typically acquired. The second thing is about the notification that we do. Notifications for vacation cases require a sign. We also distribute letters to all of the affected property owners that abut that vacation property. So there are those opportunities for public input because they are notified about the upcoming subdivision meeting as well as the planning commission meeting. So they have those opportunities, and if we receive feedback, it can prompt a more intensive discussion and review of that at other boards and other committees. But in this case, that simply did not happen. We did reach out again to other departments and organizations to see if there were any concerns or issues with this, and there were not. So it proceeded through the regular process.
Scott, just for conversation, is this something that you guys mail letters out to the neighbors as well?
I'm sorry, could you?
Do you guys mail letters for situations like this, or is that just for zoning?
No, great question. So we do mail out notices for this one, but it's only to the abutting property owners because those are the ones who are primarily affected.
Thank you.
And again, Scott, notification was sent out regarding this specific item to the adjacent properties, correct?
That is correct. Yep.
And did you guys receive any type of feedback?
No, I don't believe so, because one of them is the applicant, and then on the other side, It's a neighbor, I don't think they had any issues with it. Otherwise, it would have been listed in the staff report.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder, the difference between an item that is like this in consent versus in new business, can you just address that to the community?
Just in terms that a new business item typically ends up there because in some form or fashion, it's been deemed to be somewhat controversial, that it warrants additional discussion. So at that point, we know that it will be discussed at the city council meeting. We prepare a presentation, we've got talking points, and then we go through that deliberation and discussion. When it's a consent item, we prepare the material, of course, in the staff report. There's the opportunity for a council member to pull it, and if it gets pulled, then it's up for discussion similar to this fashion with the ability for public comment.
Mayor, if I could, council also has a policy that it has approved that outlines the items that are suitable for consent, and anything that doesn't fall into the categories listed by the council must go to new business.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Bob. Any further questions? This resides in Councilmember Maggie Ballard's district.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to take the recommended action, follow the recommendation of the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, and approve the vacation order. Simple majority of 7 votes will be required, and authorize the necessary signatures.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Board of Bids and Contracts dated February 24th, 2025.
Morning, Mayor, City Council, Josh Slauber, Department of Finance. The Board of Bids and Contracts convened February 24th, 2025 for the following items. We have for engineering, the water distribution system, sanitary sewer, street improvements to serve Cotton Creek Estates addition tied with sanitary sewer to serve Cotton Creek Estates and Colt Meadows addition. For Noak Construction Company Incorporated for an aggregate bid total of $843,361.50. This is subject to your approval of a new engineer estimate and budget authorization on February 25th, today. We have the 2024 Sanitary Sewer Rehabilitation Phase C for SAK Construction for $326,600. For purchasing, we have the self-contained breathing apparatus cylinders for Municipal Emergency Services LLC in the amount of $180,700. We have grit removal services for the water treatment plant for Waste Connections of Kansas Incorporated for the rates listed for 1 year with 2 one-year options to renew. We have the transit facility electric vehicle infrastructure rebid for Atlas Electric LLC in the amount of $135,100. We have the scissor-style 100K recessed vehicle lift for Automotive Equipment Incorporated for an aggregate bid total of $188,500. We have the mowing of drainage way for a contract change order for Commercial Lawn Management of Wichita Incorporated for an amended estimated annual usage of $570,457.80. We have 4 skid steers for Dustin Bobcat North America Incorporated for an aggregate bid total of $317,269.68. We have the 1 Massey Deluxe 6S 165 trailer with grapple bucket for John Schmidt and Sons Incorporated for $190,759. We have 1 Bobcat telehandler for Dustin Bobcat North America Incorporated for $90,433.38. We have the Cisco wireless controllers for Logicalis Incorporated for $159,736.69. This is how to become a vendor with the city. This is our purchasing calendar of events that the city is hosting or participating with their small business resource partners. And these are open public opportunities out on the street today. And I'd be happy to try to answer any of your questions, and I recommend your approval.
Questions for staff? I see none. I move to approve the Board of Bids and Contracts for February 24th, 2025.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Petitions for public improvements.
Good morning again, Paul Gunzelman, Public Works and Utilities. For the record, I have a few petitions for your consideration this morning. The signatures on the petitions represent 100% of the improvement district, and the petitions are valid per Kansas statute. Schulte Johnson Addition, Phase 3, located in District 4. The project will provide drainage improvements required for a new residential development and to cover cost of a private bid. Schulte Johnson Addition Phase 3, located in District 4. On September 22nd, 2020, the City Council approved water, sanitary sewer, and paving improvements required for a new residential development. The developer has submitted revised petitions with revised budgets to shift the project financing from publicly bid improvements to acquisition of privately constructed improvements. Pike Addition, Pike 3rd Edition, and Pike 4th Edition, located in District 4. On December 3rd, 2024, the City Council approved water and sanitary sewer improvements required for a new residential development. The developer has submitted revised petitions with revised budgets to reflect current market conditions and to cover costs of a private bid. And finally, NRD Edition, located in District 2. On June 1st, 2021, the City Council approved sewer improvements required for a new residential development. The developer has submitted a revised petition to reflect current market conditions. It is recommended that the City Council approve the new and revised petitions and budgets, adopt the new and amending resolutions, and authorize the necessary signatures. And I will stand for questions.
Questions for staff? Paul, just a reminder, petitions for public improvements are all on specials?
That is correct, yes.
Thank you. I move to approve the petitions for public improvements.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Council member appointments and comments.
Are there appointments? We'll start in numerical order. Number 1.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to reappoint Kristen Stinnett to the Ethics Board, Lori Lawrence to the Sustainability Board, Nikayla Pack, Natalie Merton, Chelsea Jackson, Twyla Purdy to the District Advisory Board, as well as Kaylin Jackson as the youth member to the District 1 Advisory Board.
Thank you. I would like to appoint Ton Nguyen to the District 2 Advisory Board and Chris Stanier to the Transit Advisory Board. I've sent their names to the clerk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to appoint Dominic Gura, reappoint Dominic Gura to Cultural Funding Board, Gary Schmidt to the Land Bank, Ibrahim Abdullah to the Sustainability Board, and Vicki Cheney Little to the Ethics Board.
Sorry. I would like to reappoint Constance Paraska to the Ethics Board.
I'd like to reappoint Marv Schellenberger to the Housing Board.
And I will appoint the following individuals. For the Wichita Employees Retirement System Board of Trustees, Jamie Buster, and to the WAMPO Executive Board, J.V. Johnston. I will move to approve the appointments by council members and mayor.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6-0. We will now move to council member comments. We'll go in numerical order.
Thanks, Mayor. Today is the day to go vote. You have until 7 p.m. You're voting yes or no on 259, and I want to encourage everybody to be informed and go cast their vote today.
I'd like to thank everyone coming out. I see a lot of golf cart people here, so I appreciate you coming out. Won't be able to speak today, but on the 18th, we have our night meeting, March 18th. please come to that. You will be able to speak, and you'll see how kind of sausage is made today and what ordinance we come up with. So I appreciate you coming out.
Thank you all very much for attending the workshop today. I see no further comments, so I will move to adjourn the meeting for February 25th, 2025.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6-0. We will now pass it to City Manager Layton.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a very packed agenda for you, so we'll jump right into it. The first item, as the Vice Mayor mentioned, has to do with the operation of golf carts on public streets. We're going to share with you feedback from the District Advisory Board meetings and then seek direction on what you'd like to see brought forward on March 18th for your consideration.
Good morning, Sharon Dickroff, City Law Department. I'm here today to talk about the operation of golf carts. For background, Kansas statutes preclude the operation of golf carts on interstate highways, on roadways with a posted speed limit greater than 30 miles per hour between sunrise and sundown unless they have a slow-moving vehicle emblem and motorcycle lights. Golf carts are not allowed in cities unless they have passed the appropriate legislation. Currently, the city does not have an ordinance allowing golf cart operation, so the operation of golf carts within the city on any city street is illegal. Any ordinance passed by the city could not be less restrictive than state law. We can always be more restrictive, but we can't be less restrictive. So any ordinance that would be passed could not allow operation on highways or roads over 30 miles per hour, could not allow operation during the evening unless they have the slow-moving emblem and motorcycle lights. Penalties also cannot be less restrictive. For most violations under the state statute, it's a fine of $75 in court costs. Background, several neighboring smaller suburbs have passed legislation allowing golf carts. Larger cities have either specifically precluded the operation or have not passed an ordinance allowing such operation. Those are Overland Park, Kansas City, Kansas, Topeka, and Manhattan. The current proposed ordinance would allow operation of golf carts on certain streets. It would prohibit golf carts on highways, arterial streets, streets with a speed limit more than 30 miles per hour. And in the core area is essentially defined from the river to Hydraulic on the east, US 54 on the south, and Seneca, and then it winds kind of along the river. Golf carts under the current version may not cross highways or arterial streets. Currently, the provisions that were recommended were that all golf carts have the slow-moving vehicle emblem and a city registration. The registration fee proposed was $75 per year. Proof of liability insurance is required, and golf cart operation is prohibited on sidewalks, walking trails, or paths. Operation is prohibited between the hours of 30 minutes after sunrise, 30 minutes before sunset. Prohibits the operation of golf carts on public streets unless the driver is 18. Requires that the golf cart comply with general traffic laws, including maintaining liability insurance. A spreadsheet has been provided to you as part of the packet that outlines the provisions from other neighboring cities. There was a lot of discussion at the DABs as to what other cities did or didn't allow, so I wanted it to be clear to the council as to what those provisions were. Most of the suburbs around Wichita do allow golf cart operation at 16. Hayes has a limit of 18. Most of the suburban cities allow golf carts to cross streets with speeds in excess of 30 miles per hour or arterial streets. Most prohibit the crossing of major highways. Those would be K-15 in Derby, US 54 in Goddard. All cities require driver's license and insurance. No cities allow the operation of golf carts on sidewalks or bike paths. They do allow them to cross those types of areas, but require the driver to essentially yield to pedestrian traffic. Derby and Olathe do allow for operation during the evenings with the slow-moving emblem and motorcycle lights, which would be required by state law. The registration fees range greatly from a one-time fee of $25 to $100 per year. Little history, the proposed ordinance was passed on first reading on January 14th. January 21st, when the ordinance came back, it was pulled from the consent agenda for second reading and referred to DABs. DAB presentations have been made to 5 of the 6 DABs. The presentation for DAB 1 is scheduled in March, and the DAB comments were varied. You should also have in your packet a detailed summary of those DAB comments. The next couple of slides have general comments from the DABs. DAB 1 has not had their presentation made. Spoke with Council Member Johnson. The one comment that he has heard is that the excluding operation in the downtown core isn't fair to core residents. DAB 2 comments felt that the ordinance was not needed. Police didn't have time to enforce. Golf carts on roadways could lead to more traffic accidents, parking issues, and traffic congestion. Overall, my reading was that the group was not supportive of the changes. DAB 3 was concerned that it may not be good for all neighborhoods, seemed supportive to allowing folks to operate at 16, concerned as to how this would affect other types of vehicles, the micro vehicles, the smaller motorcycles, asked if it could be limited to certain geographic areas, was generally not opposed, but wanted some fewer restrictions, and appeared maybe some additional restrictions on minors and seatbelts and trying to keep folks safe. DAB 4 comments felt that the ordinance was needed, that however, as written, the restrictions were prohibited. Golf carts should be able to cross streets, age should be reduced to 16, golf carts should be allowed in downtown, and that the annual registration fee seemed excessive, and that golf carts should be allowed on wider paths and sidewalks. And I want to address that issue. I spoke with Paul Gunzelman on the width of sidewalks. The width of sidewalks in older neighborhoods is 4 feet, some may be 5 feet. Newer subdivisions, the sidewalks are 5 feet wide. Sidewalks on arterial streets are now, most of them 6 feet. If it is a multi-use path, it is 10 feet. Thought that information might be helpful in looking as to whether we wanted to allow some operation on those types of paths. DAB 5 was supportive of the ordinance, however, felt that it was too restricted, wanted to reduce the age to 16, allow nighttime operation, address the seatbelt requirement for older golf carts that may not have come with them from the manufacturer, had concerns about the amount of the registration fee, and felt that the golf cart should be able to cross arterial streets, and would like to allow operation on sidewalks if the golf cart would yield to pedestrians. DAB 6, comments were kind of all over the board, was initially supportive of the ordinance, but felt that some compromise in some of the provisions might be necessary. Citizen input supported lowering the operation age to 16, opposed the core limitations or restrictions, and wanted to allow nighttime operations. General overview of the concerns that were expressed. Age to operate should be 16. Golf cart should be allowed to operate at night. Registration fee is too high. Should it be a one-time registration fee? Golf carts should be allowed to cross highways and arterial streets. They should be allowed in the downtown core area. And a re-examination of the seatbelt requirements was also suggested. The current penalties are an infraction or a fine up to $500. The judge will establish that amount. There are certain offenses that, to be consistent with state law, are going to have a minimum fine and a potential of jail time, and those would be the no insurance and no driver's license. Those are minimum requirements that are set by state law. I am here for questions. I believe Lieutenant Fort is here for questions from the police department, and we would stand for any questions or direction.
Go ahead.
Sharon, one quick clarifying question. When you say one of the general ordinance concerns was golf carts should be allowed to cross highways and arterial streets. By highway, are we talking like Kellogg and Oliver, like going across Kellogg on Oliver, or like the actual highway?
I don't know that the commenters made a distinction. I'm fairly certain that the police department and certainly the law department wouldn't be supportive of having golf carts cross Kellogg, K-15, K-96, 254. And those seem consistent with what the suburban areas are doing. If you want to cross Oliver, we would need to tweak the current ordinance, but I think highways should be left as we've defined it in the ordinance, and we've outlined what those actual highways are, and would clarify that if it's a highway by state law definition, you shouldn't cross it.
I agree. That was why I was a little concerned about that.
Follow-up question to that highway question. The city of Wichita doesn't maintain highways, right? Kellogg is not maintained by the city of Wichita. That is a KDOT maintenance issue. Is that correct?
I think Paul left, but yes, generally speaking, that's true.
So K42 would be another?
Yes.
So could maybe the language regarding that say only city-owned streets?
It could, yes. You're still going to have to maintain the limitation of the 30 mile per hour or less. But yes, I mean, you could put that golf carts could cross streets, take out any kind of distinction of arterial streets, and just not highways, which we listed in the initial draft.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate it. You and I have spent a lot of time on this.
We have.
I appreciate your effort on this. Just for discussion purposes, I'd like to propose the new ordinance include the following items. They would be allowed to drive on side streets, which is 30 miles per hour or less. It would require a valid driver's license, so basically 16 and over. Can drive at night with appropriate lights and slow-moving emblem per state regulations. May cross arterial streets at controlled intersections. Allow on sidewalks, but must yield to pedestrians. The penalty would be lowered to $200. I'd propose there be no city fee and no requirement for seatbelts.
Just a follow-up for anyone, really. That was the next thing I was going to ask about. So allowing for crossing of arterial streets at controlled intersections. A little bit of maybe my concern is if we have sidewalks that are 4 foot, 5 foot, and these golf carts are probably taking up that whole space. If we are allowing them to legally drive on the road as well, how do they then cross the street? Like, because it would be, if we just take Douglas, you go up to Douglas and Market, and you want to make a turn to the north, you don't have to go at a controlled intersection if you want to turn there. I mean, you're just regular traffic at that point.
Well, Market would not be allowed.
But I'm saying, so this would allow this on the streets, in the
Not
downtown
on
core.
Douglas or Market.
Downtown core, though, that would be the core.
It would allow in downtown corridor, but it'd have to be on the sidewalk.
Okay,
And the sidewalks have to yield to pedestrians.
okay. So you can only then go, you can't be on the street, but you can go on the sidewalk, and you have to go across the street at the intersection.
Correct.
Does that also include a crosswalk?
Yes.
Okay.
But we can have bikes on sidewalks.
Actually, you can have bikes on sidewalks, just not in the downtown core.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Because are you allowing golf carts, like the proposed ordinance in the core? Like in downtown?
Yes, in the core too.
How would that work?
So your exception or your proposal would be to remove the prohibitions of golf carts in the downtown core,
Yes.
and then you want those golf carts to be operated on just the sidewalks in the downtown core?
That's correct. The reason for that is parking situations in downtown are limited, and we are looking for other means of mobility, bicycles, walking, and I think golf carts is another one of those that will allow that mobility. Delano, Old Town, downtown. So I think it'd be good to allow them. But they must yield to pedestrians.
So one concern, or I guess to add to the conversation, maybe not a concern. So I just had a really good conversation with 2 downtown residents of District 1, and so our scooters are allowed in the streets. But we wouldn't say the golf carts could be allowed in the streets. And the golf carts, I think, overall, were probably safer than the scooters because you're just sitting on the scooter. So is that something we should also consider, is just letting the golf carts be in the streets and not just on the sidewalk, since less protected scooters are in the streets?
I would answer that as scooters are similar to bicycles. Bicycles are allowed in the streets.
Not in downtown.
Well, but, and I just pulled
Bicycles are
up.
allowed in the street in downtown?
Oh, down the streets.
I've
yes.
driven downtown on
I
streets.
apologize. Yeah.
I thought you said sidewalks.
So I would say that's why scooters could be allowed in downtown, very similar to bicycles. Golf carts are wider and bigger, take up more space, could impede, especially with the two-way streets now.
Yeah.
Could impede traffic. That's why I would not allow them there and move them to the sidewalks.
And I've pulled up the ordinance on electric scooters. The ordinance provides that scooters are not to be on the sidewalks. I see them on the sidewalks, so I'm not going to comment on that, but the ordinance does not, I mean, the ordinance puts the scooters in the street and doesn't have them on the sidewalks. So you would be having golf carts in the sidewalks and scooters in the streets. I'm just looking for clarification.
I've had a resident ask me if the golf carts are on the sidewalks downtown. What if there's someone on a wheelchair downtown?
Right.
There isn't going to be room, like a pedestrian I understand can maybe skip to the side. But I have a resident who had concerns because they've seen it happen before, I don't know. But what happens when a golf cart would come and, meet a wheelchair? Then what would happen? Because one's going to have to go in the street.
And piggybacking off of that, we have a lot of disabled residents who are centered downtown, perhaps blind individuals who, that might be an issue with them walking along the streets. We get knocked for that already, or along the sidewalk, and then not see a golf cart coming. That's the concern, I guess, with the sidewalks downtown for myself as well.
I can't think of a sidewalk that couldn't handle both of them in downtown. Maybe you can give me an example, but I can't think of one.
Yeah, I'll drive through it today and see
Okay.
what I come up with.
Go just to field study.
Yeah, there we go. That's usually Dalton's thing, but I'll
To cross at a controlled intersection. Other drivers, if you come to the intersection, are going to be more likely to look for a golf cart going across in the crosswalk at a controlled intersection, rather than it just zipping between Maze, or zipping between Maple and Central, and I see a lot of those golfers just zip across Maze. And if you're not looking for them, you're not going to see them.
So when we say controlled, that means crosswalks? Is that the definition?
Yes.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
it could be a stoplight or a stop sign, too.
I got some concerns with the stop signs. So are we talking the stop sign on the arterial street to where the arterial traffic comes to a stop?
Yes.
I might be more open to that if the arterials come to a stop. I don't, like we said, I don't want them zipping across for sure.
Right.
Also, the seat belts, I think we need to at least have seat belts for minors. That is something my district advisory board was pretty adamant about, I think, especially one quote was, "I would feel pretty bad if I hit a baby that fell out of a golf cart." So I'm glad that District 3 is against running babies over. I'm proud of that one, but there's concern about that at least. And that follows in line, I guess, like if you're under 16, I believe you have to have a seatbelt regardless. in a car? I can't remember, is it a 16? Yeah, regardless of where you're sitting in the car?
I would answer that is manufacturers don't have the option of seat belts at this time. It's an add-on, which is pretty expensive to add seat belts onto a golf cart. We may want to limit the golf cart to the number of riders allowed in the cart. So if it allows for 2 riders, only 2 people can ride in it. If it's 4, only 4 people can ride.
There was a lot of conversation about the seatbelt situation at many of the meetings that I went to as well, because some of the older golf carts, like you said, they don't come with those from the manufacturer. And I think either at the Reflection meeting or District 5, maybe it was even mine, they said it was like $500 or $600 to figure out how to add a seatbelt on. So while I'm a proponent of driving with cars, but I think there were also comments that if it tipped over or something and you're strapped to it, you wouldn't be able to get out. So I don't know, those are just kind of comments that were shared at some of the meetings that I was with in regards to seatbelts.
$500 or $600, I can respect that, but it's still safety of children that we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're wanting to drive a golf cart, if you want to have kids in there, yeah, I think maybe you should have the safety devices in there. So that's just a concern of me. And then the $75 fee, if we're going to permit this, we need to make sure that we pay for it somehow. So that way we're not digging out of the general fund for licensing golf carts or permitting golf carts. So I am on board. It could be a one-time fee, so that way we don't have to continue to go back to it, and the permits can last a couple of years. It doesn't have to be a yearly fee, but I do believe that if we're going to permit it, that paying for the additional work that's going to be done would be needed, so we don't.
What if we don't permit at all, which is the case now? So we wouldn't have to regulate it. The ordinance could say you have to have insurance on the golf cart.
Yes, I mean, you could require that the golf carts have insurance. The issue is going to be one of enforcement for the police department, that if I see the 14-year-old kids that we all, I think, agree we don't want operating on the roadway, and there's a golf cart, and no one's going to say who owns the golf cart, where does the golf cart go, what happens to the golf cart, who is notified that the golf cart may or may not be impounded if there's nobody there to take the golf cart. And then there's absolutely no way for the police department to notify, hopefully the kids tell their parents what happened to the golf cart, but there's no way for the police department to notify because these aren't a registered vehicle. So there's not a VIN number to look up in the state database because there's no tag.
I did talk to a couple of policemen about that issue, and they said, and there is a problem with 12, 13, 14-year-olds driving golf carts with 6 or 7 people hanging off of it. Mm-hmm. So there is a problem there. He said if they see that happening, they pull that golf cart over, there's no way they're going to let that golf cart leave without those kids telling them where they live and who owns that golf cart. So if they run home, he's got the golf cart there. The parent's going to wonder where the golf cart is. So
If you're, okay, another question, I guess, would be if your license is suspended or restricted due to maybe a DUI or something like that, how does that apply to the golf carts? Does it mean that your golf, you just
I think
can't
you'd have to have a valid driver's license.
So like fully instated driver's license to where there's no restrictions on it or anything? Because a lot of times if you get that DUI or you have your license suspended, a lot of times you might just get a restricted license to where you can drive maybe to the grocery store or to work or to church or something. And, people still might be using the golf cart to do something like that, drive to work, or I don't know necessarily if they drive to work, but maybe to the grocery store or something like that. So how would that apply if we have restricted license to the golf carts?
We can't be outside whatever restrictions the state of Kansas has given on the golf cart. And I think the conversations that I have seen at the DABs were that they wanted it to be a non-restricted license. But if I have a restricted license and I'm operating a golf cart's a motor vehicle. So depending upon what my restrictions are, we can't override those restrictions.
I think it needs to be a valid license, just flat out. I mean, otherwise it just starts to get really complicated. Like you need 16, and have a valid license, you know.
Any further discussion? Does that give staff enough to redraft something to bring forward? And I know that Councilmember Johnson's going to have his DAB meeting on Monday. Would there be enough time to even start sharing it with some of the DABs, again, before the March 18th meeting?
We won't have a draft by Monday, and we're already going to be at that DAB. So if there are DABs that want to rehear it again, we might be able to do, I'm just thinking what the schedule's like and whether your DABs are canceled that week when you're all gone for NLC.
Won't work.
Mine is.
No?
Won't work. Ours is Monday also.
Okay.
That 5's Monday, and then we're gone the next week.
I mean, I hate to read, yes, I could have a draft of some of the changes by Monday, but do you want, and I'm looking at Councilperson Johnson, do you want the old version or the new version?
Good question.
That is a really good question. If it cannot be ready on Monday, the old version is okay, because that would give my DAB an opportunity to give the same type of feedback. If it is done, then they will be able to give feedback on what has come of all the other feedback.
Okay,
I don't really have a preference on that.
okay.
I do have going back to my original thing, I kind of have a concern if we're treating scooters and golf carts differently. And I don't know if that impacts whatever you draft, but I do think we may need to continue to talk more about that if we're gonna have golf carts on the sidewalks and scooters in the street, but the golf carts are bigger and the scooters are not. And I understand how they could be seen as similar to bikes, but I just think that's I think that needs further clarification.
Those are policy questions. And can you allow scooters on the sidewalks? Yes. My thought is if you're going to allow scooters on the sidewalks, our bicycles in the downtown core, should they be prohibited? And that's been a long kind of internal conversation since most of the unhoused have bicycles and they're in downtown. Whether that's enforced, whether that should be enforced, and again, those are policy questions. But I would tend to agree that consistency would be nice, whatever that consistency ends up to be.
JV, would you mind repeating the new proposed ordinance, please?
Sure. I propose that they be allowed to drive on streets 30 miles per hour or less, per state statute, have a valid driver's license, drive at night with appropriate lights and a slow-moving emblem, also per state ordinance, state law, may cross arterial streets at controlled intersections, allow on sidewalks, but must yield to pedestrians. No city fee, no fee to permit it, and no requirement for seat belts. I'd also like to lower the penalty to $200 from $500. I think $500 is a little excessive.
I have a question for Sharon. How, as far as the fee goes, the registration, do you think that's something important to include? Regardless of the fee, do you think the registration portion is something that needs to be included?
I think the registration would be helpful so that we know who owns the golf carts. whether they're abandoned, whether we impound them, whether we reach out to the owner. That would also be important that currently there are provisions that the owner shouldn't allow their 14-year-old to drive the car. And without some sort of a way to track down that owner, and I don't know what that would be without the registration. Regarding the fee, most types of registrations we have, we try to offset staff costs. Finance indicated that the cost of staff to process the fee, to buy the decals and mail them out, get them out, would be about $35. So even if you brought it down to 25, which is consistent with what the other cities are doing, whether that's a one-time fee of $25.50 or whether that's a 25 renewal. I don't know that, and again, I don't know where the police are, that a yearly registration is necessarily required, as long as we build in some sort of a requirement that if I sell my golf cart, lease my golf cart, that they notify the person or notify notify finance that they no longer own that golf cart.
Sorry, Sharon, just to clarify, and maybe Vice Mayor, if you can clarify, so you're proposing no registration fee,
That's what I'm proposing.
but you have to have a slow-moving vehicle sticker.
That's per state law.
Okay.
Yes.
The slow-moving vehicle is just the triangle. So that's not something that the city would provide anyway. They would have to go to
I don't know where you buy that.
auto shout zone, whatever, Tractor Supply, to get that type of an emblem. And those would, the way I understand it, those would only be required if the individual wanted to operate their golf cart at night. So if I know that I'm just going to drive my golf cart from my house to the pool, and the pool closes at dusk or whatever and come back, you wouldn't necessarily have to have the motorcycle lights and the emblem on your golf cart. If you know you're going to drive it to the humidor and stay until midnight, then you better have lights and you better have the triangle.
Do the other cities that you looked at, do they require registration? of some
I'm sorry?
sort? The other cities, comparable cities that you looked to, do they require registration as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Except a light.
Could registration be at the point of purchase instead of coming down to City Hall to do it?
What if you buy your golf
Or-
cart
or-
in Oklahoma? They wouldn't know.
Well, no. It'd be another option for people to get them. If you buy in Oklahoma, you have to come to City Hall to do it, but.
I would
Or is it
imagine
Easier places, or the library, or,
Most of our license and registrations are done electronically. So I don't know that the person would necessarily have to come to City Hall. It would be a matter of,
do it online?
and again, I can't speak to finance, for finance, but to me, it would be much like the dog registrations, that I'm going to register my dogs, I'm going to fill out all the paperwork, I'm going to submit my credit card online, and then when they go, oh, yep, Sharon has 3 dogs, she can have an animal maintenance permit, they're going to mail that to me.
Okay, okay. I know
So-
when I did the vet did my mother's dog, came with the annual visit, he filled out the paperwork, said,
Take it.
here, include a check for it, $25,
Yep.
something like that.
Yep.
$25 and mail it to this address.
You can mail it, you can also scan it and do it online.
Yeah, or you can do it online, okay.
Yep.
Okay, another concern from my dad is the possibility of other types of vehicles sneaking in under this. Could you give a description as to exactly what the parameters of it being considered a golf cart are?
We tried to address that the best we could in the definitions, which define an all-terrain vehicle, a golf cart, a micro-utility truck. A golf cart is a vehicle that has less than 3 wheels, weighs less than 1,800 pounds, is designed to be operated not more than 25 miles per hour, and designed to carry not more than 4 people. And the goal was that we would not include the ATVs, the gators, micro trucks, micro bikes within those definitions. So certainly the intent is that this is just a golf cart. And if you don't have a place in the back for your clubs, it's probably not a golf cart. If it goes 45 miles per hour, it's probably not a golf cart.
Do we have any examples of any of the places that have allowed this as to maybe some other types of vehicles being snuck in under this?
I don't have any information or knowledge. I will say that there are other, again, there are suburban cities that do allow gators and do allow ATVs, and they have an all-encompassing group of special purpose vehicles definitions. But certainly, I think it's staff's intent, and again, the intent of the city council to limit this to golf carts so that we don't have a sudden influx of micro trucks and micro bikes all around Wichita.
And throw the bag of clubs over the back seat of a riding lawnmower and ride down the street, right?
Maybe.
I know that Shawnee and Olathe both have it and limit it to just golf carts, not all-terrain vehicles.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure we're not getting, sneaking something in here. So that's a concern.
Yeah.
Not to continue belaboring the point, but this whole sidewalk thing like really has me thinking, and I don't know if we talk to Bike Walk Wichita or anything, but no matter what we do on this, I do think maybe we should engage Bike Walk Wichita, the partnership, especially with the downtown survey about to start. I've already talked to them a little bit and shared information with Gary and Paul about Douglas, because they kind of want to put that in their surveys. Maybe we can look at the core in general, what's allowed on the sidewalk and the street, and maybe get more broader feedback in that way. And at some point, council-wise, align our ordinances with that public feedback to where we have consistency rather than some things here and some things there.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. And I don't, you were here, I think Becky was here when they did not allow scooters on sidewalks. So, I mean, I'd like to kind of hear the reasoning for that, because for me, like Sharon said, I see it all the time on sidewalks. And I think they're safer on sidewalk than they are in the street.
I think it had to do with the downtown congestion on the sidewalks, which was the same thought process with not allowing bicycles on the sidewalks in the central business district, as if you have people trying to walk to work, and you have scooters zipping and bicycles zipping, and do you want your sidewalks to be for pedestrians, or do you want your sidewalks to be essentially a multi-use path?
Well, at some point in time, I hope we have enough people walking to work on the sidewalks in downtown. Haven't seen it yet.
We had also, Mayor, if I can, we had safety data from other cities that put prohibitions in place because of conflicts between pedestrians and scooters, and that's why the council forced them out into the street.
We were also worried about the safety of the scooter riders, right? Because they're going at a faster pace than someone walking, and somebody leaves a restaurant or a retail on Douglas, for example, and somebody's going on a scooter 10 or more miles an hour, it could cause them to be injured. So we're worried about pedestrians, but also scooter drivers. I just want to reiterate one more thing. I said it during the council meeting. My dad also reiterated it. We do the community survey every year, and we find that crime prevention is one of the top 3 issues in our community. And my dad was very concerned about this is an issue that police just don't have time to enforce. So that's still going to be on the back of my mind during this. I'm not sure where I'm going to land yet, but that is probably my number one concern, especially after speaking with the Wichita Police Department many times, that, you know, what is going to be the burden on them that's going to take away the core function of what they need to be doing. So, thank you.
I did talk to Chief Sullivan about that issue. How can we get it enforced? And he did mention the same points you did, which I do agree with. He suggested that his traffic team would enforce it instead of the police officers.
His traffic team may not always be, it's not just going to be the core, right? It could be down Webb Road, or it could be,
Right.
you know, whatever.
And
So
the point is, they're all over the city, so
Yeah,
they could do
but-
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just safety is still a concern, but also our police officers' time.
I'm not going to belabor the conversation, but I did have a quick question. when this was originally proposed to us, there was a $75 annual fee. I wanted to know the justification behind that now, knowing additional information that just came forward, which is it's going to cost $35 if it's a one-time fee, just the processing, staff time, et cetera. I always am mindful that there is staff time to be considered in any new item that we do. And I want to know that we, number one, cost recover. That's number one. But then now 75 seems very excessive. So I just want to know the justification why it was so excessive.
The initial draft had 25, and then when we started looking at actual costs for that first year startup to get the licenses printed or the decals printed, staff felt that that 25 was not going to be a cost recovery. And in talking with Mark Manning, 25 won't be a complete cost recovery for his staff. So whether you wanted to have the first year be 50, which would allow more of that cost recovery when we have the decals, and then every renewal be 25, that's a process that some of the other smaller cities have used, that they do still have the annual fee. It's just the first year it's higher so that you get the decal. It's in effect, it's going to go, or reduce it to 25 each year. And again, that's a policy decision. I think 75 was what staff felt needed to happen at least that first year to make sure that we could get the appropriate documentations online, staff time to do the registrations, the cost to have the labels printed or the decals printed. So somewhere between 25 and 50 would recover most of staff time.
So I'll be on the record by saying that I'm in favor of Vice Mayor Johnston's idea of no registration fee. The whole idea, I believe, when this came forward was to legalize the usage of golf carts and not further put restrictions. And so it was a first step, and now that first step is getting additional steps, obviously, with community input through DABs and an additional workshop. So I'm going to just go on the record by saying that I'm in favor of Vice Mayor Johnston's idea. Any further questions for staff? I see none. Thank you very much, Sharon.
Okay, thank you.
City Manager.
Mayor, I have the next item. I'm concerned about timing because I know some of you have to leave around 11:30-ish. So I'm going to start my item. Well, actually, Mark Manning's here. I'm going to switch the order. I'd like Mark to talk about the status of our budget, and then I'm going to talk about the 5 budget research projects that we have done in the interim since the adoption of the 2025 budget. The reason we originally want to talk about those was that they're feeding into the narrative for 26 and 27, but I don't think we'll miss anything by switching the order. So with that, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about our forecast for the upcoming budget.
Well, good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Mark Manning with the Department of Finance.
You can stand on it if you want to.
Today, I want to kind of kick off our 26-27 budget process, and we typically do that by providing you an updated forecast on where we think we'll be. We'll focus primarily on the general fund today. And then at the end of the presentation, just very briefly, I'll touch on 3 other topics. I think I have 1 slide on each. We'll talk about the R&R just very briefly, and we'll talk about the budget calendar, then we'll talk about some next steps. So we do a financial plan every year. We typically start in about February, and we do a preliminary one, and we update it continuously throughout the budget process, and ultimately it leads to what we consider the adopted financial plan, which is included in your adopted budget. That is to say, the current financial plan is the adopted budget financial plan, which we did back in August. So obviously it's a little dated because that was about 6 months ago, so we'll go over some things that we're seeing and some potential changes to our environment. Now, I would tell you with certainty, there's only one thing that I can absolutely, with 100% certainty, tell you about our financial plan, particularly what I'm going to present to you this morning, and that is that it will change, because again, this is an iterative process. So how do we develop the financial plan? We look at a lot of empirical data and trends on all our revenue streams. They're all influenced by different things, and we study and analyze that and try to use that to provide an educated estimate into the future. We spend a lot of time on that. We also look at our external environment. There's a lot of influences on our revenue portfolio, federal monetary and fiscal policy, state legislation, economic conditions, a variety of factors we look at. We coordinate with our departments, particularly in the area of revenues that they generate, for example, user fees and things of that nature. We incorporate any updated policy direction, anything that you have approved since August that would impact our forecast. And finally, I would point out that when we do this, our objective is to try to provide a middle-of-the-road forecast. We try not to be too optimistic. We try not to be too pessimistic. Our objective is to be as accurate as possible, but we try to mitigate both upside and downside risk to some degree. So I'm going to go through 4 large revenue streams into the general fund. Those are the ones that are probably most relevant for our purposes. We have a lot of other smaller streams, but again, they tend to operate fairly predictably and are far less relevant. Property tax, as you know, is about 37% of our general fund revenue stream, so it's very important to us. It's based, generally speaking, on 3 variables. Assessed valuation, which is the size of the tax base. It's based on the mill levy rate, which we set, or the city council sets, and then it's based on delinquencies. So we won't get our assessed valuation estimate until July 15th. That's a date based on statute. However, the county, I think last week, gave some preliminary indication about assessed valuation, which is very helpful for us, and so we'll use that to kind of inform what we think our guidance may be. So assessed valuation growth has several components, really 2 that are really relevant, and that is new construction, which is expansion of the tax base, and that's at the top of the chart, and then reappraisal of the existing tax base, which is the reappraisal line there. Those are really the 2 key drivers of our assessed valuation growth. The new construction generally, in most cases, increases about 1% to 2% a year fairly consistently. We might have a 3% year in really booming times. We might have a 0% year, but that one's relatively stable in the 1% to 2% range, and you can see that's what our guidance is. Reappraisal, on the other hand, if you look at the long term, reappraisal growth is going to be somewhere in the 2.5% range, long term, 20, 25 years. But there's a high degree of variability on reappraisal, primarily due to economic situations. During the great financial crisis, we had 4 years of 0 growth in reappraisal. The last couple of years, we've had pretty aggressive growth in reappraisal. So it's a high degree of variability, but it generally speaking is around 2.5% a year if you look at the long term. You can see last year in 2025, our reappraisal or our total assessed valuation growth was about almost 8%, which is very high for us here locally. You can see what we're expecting now, again, kind of informed by what the county told us, trying to make some inferences into some of the indications that they provided. We now expect somewhere in the neighborhood of 6% growth in 2026 and maybe a little bit of a taper off in 2027. Again, this is really early, so I have no doubt that number is going to change. I think the county mentioned that the appeals process is next, and that undoubtedly will reduce valuation to some degree. There's a few other nuances. State-assessed utilities aren't done typically until June or sometimes even July. So there's many things to continue on this story, but the gist of it is we do think assessed valuation growth will be stronger than what we initially projected, which means, based on our current mill levy policy, that our property tax revenues will probably be stronger than what we had previously thought. So let's shift to sales tax. Sales tax is probably the most economically sensitive revenue stream we have. It's usually kind of serves as our canary in the coal mine. If we start seeing changes in our economy, we're probably going to see it on sales tax first. We had a relatively slow growth year last year, but since we really weren't in recession, we're going to attribute that primarily to the stimulus that happened during the pandemic. That's our hypothesis, so suffice to say, we expect more normative growth in the future. That's generally around 2.5% to 3%. Obviously, this is one of those ones that we will keep a very close eye on. We get monthly data, so it's pretty easy to kind of identify trends. I want to point out another thing on sales tax that impacts our growth in sales tax, and this is somewhat out of our control. Based on state formula, our portion of the countywide sales tax is based on a state formula. Half is based on population of the city of Wichita vis-a-vis everybody else in the county. Half is based on taxes levied. In other words, we can control what we levy, but we can't control what the other jurisdictions levy. So our percentage tends to change a little bit, which can also have an influence on our sales tax. It's generally been declining over the last 10 or 15 years, typically not a lot, but generally our percentage of the countywide sales tax has declined. And the inference there is that the taxes levied by the city of Wichita over that time period generally has become less of a portion of the total taxes levied in our county. So let's jump to franchise fees. I think I talked about this last week and talked about the difficulty in projecting franchise fees. This is probably the most difficult revenue stream that we tried to project. Weather conditions, I'm not qualified to forecast weather conditions at all, especially in Kansas. Commodity pricing, natural gas is a huge influence. Just to give you a little example, some of our franchise fee revenue over the past few years, if you look at electric, in 21 we collected $27 million. In 22 we collected $31 million. And then in 23 we collected $29 million, so we had a $2 million dip. And then last year, as I noted last week, we collected $31 million. Very variable. Natural gas is even worse. In 21, as far as variability, in 21 we collected about $8 million on natural gas. In 22, we collected $11 million. 23, we collected $13 million. And then last year, we collected $10 million. So my point is, it's a challenge for us to project. We typically project very conservatively on franchise fees to try to de-risk our estimate. One other thing you should know about franchise fees, a lot of our franchise fees are archaic. We have franchise fees on landline phones, for example. I don't know too many people, maybe some, but not a lot of people have landline phones anymore. So, okay, we got one. Thank you very much, sir. You're contributing to us.
I'm a 98-year-old stuck in a 42-year-old body.
Another archaic source is cable TV. Okay, thank you. Back, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, cable TV was it if you wanted anything other than network TV. Now there's hundreds or tens of choices. YouTube TV, Peacock, Netflix, the list goes on and on. So point is, those two are downward drags on franchise fees. So it's a challenge to forecast, and we don't expect a whole lot in that area, a whole lot of growth typically. I talked about court fines last week, so I won't say a whole lot. Suffice to say, it's based on activity levels in our court system, and those have been declining. We view that as a systematic change, not as a transitory change, and you're going to see that reflected in some of our estimates. That'll also have an impact, presumably, on the expenditure side. I noted last week that we underspent significantly on operations. For example, last year in court, we underspent by about $1 million on the expenditure side. Not a direct offset of the $2 million we lost on revenue, but the point is both expenditures and revenues in court are impacted by activity levels. So let's talk about interest earnings. This is probably the most relevant revenue stream that tells our story over the last 3 or 4 years and tells the story of what we expect in the future. So let me back up just a little bit and give you a quick summary of where we've been and where we think we're going to go on a global basis. So after the pandemic, by policy, we determined that we needed to increase employee wages due to maintain competitiveness and due to the inflationary impact on our city employees. We successfully did that through contractual provisions with several of our bargaining units, but that increased our wage base. However, during that time period, we also had very, very strong interest earnings and growing interest earnings, and we also had some years of good AV growth. So that essentially allowed us to accommodate that growth in the wage base. But our hypothesis going forward has consistently been for several years, at some point we expect interest rates to decline, we expect assessed valuation to return to normative amounts, and when that happens, we do not believe that our organic revenue growth will be sufficient to cover our organic expenditure growth, which is to say we expect structural deficits. We talked about that last year. We talked about that the year before that. That's been a consistent theme that we expect to happen. The only question is when and to what magnitude, in my opinion. And you'll see we think the magnitude will be a little bit less, and the when keeps getting shoved out a little bit, which are both good. But fundamentally, that's the presumption that we have based all our projections, particularly in the very long term, on that structural challenge that we have. Also point out that interest earnings are not my highest priority when we're investing in the pool. My first priority is safety of principal, and this is by policy, the investment policy that you approve. The second priority is liquidity. We don't want to run out of cash when we need it. Earnings is only my third priority. We take it very seriously, and we've been, I think, very successful in maximizing earnings, but just suffice to say it is not our highest priority in terms of managing the pool. Actually, I should point out on this slide, to give you a scope of the magnitude, in 2021, we generated about $1.4 million. $1.4 million. Back then, if I could invest something and get 4 bips, I was really excited. I mean, that was a good day if I could get 4 bips on something. 4 bips, by the way, is 0.4%. Now we're investing basically at 4%, or literally 100 times greater than the rate back then. So that kind of explains the magnitude on why we went from $1 million to about $35 million in interest earnings. So that's what's going on there. When that 4% rate starts to drop, that's when you'll just see a decline in our interest earnings. Last thing I'll point out is that decrease will be extended into the future because we invest relatively long term. We typically extend the duration of our investment portfolio when we expect to be in a rate falling environment, which is where we're at today. So we have extended our duration generally to the max of our policy limit, which basically means our interest earnings are relatively stable for at least a year and a couple months. So our risk is actually after that time horizon for the most part. A lot of technical information, but I wanted you to have that background because you'll see that in the numbers here in just a minute. So let's put that all together. What does that mean for our revenue side? Well, the top line is what we would consider our current forecast, which again is 6 months out of date. The preliminary forecast is what I'm telling you today, which you'll see is more favorable, which is a good thing. In 25, court revenues is going to impact us, and we think that'll actually decrease our revenues a little bit from where we were before. But what you're seeing here is the impact of more aggressive assessed valuation growth assumptions and more aggressive interest earnings assumptions. Got a little bit more detail on this slide. Same thing, you'll see the property tax tends to compound as the base increases. So that's why you see 27 a little bit higher than 26. Interest earnings, again, we expect the decline to occur, but to be slower than what we previously expected. And then, as I mentioned, court fines, we expect to be a systemic problem and ongoing. So that's the detail of how we got to our preliminary estimate. I can't emphasize enough what I've already said, I think twice, this will change. I have no doubt this will change, but this is where we're at today. So let's shift to the expenditure side. As you know, expenditures are generally 75% salaries and wages, which is a lot. Now, those are relatively easy for us to project conceptually. What we typically do is we update that every year. We look at our employee demographic wage base in January, February. We literally look at every single employee and we literally project out their wages based on what we know about their demographics, what their contractual provisions are, and a variety of other things. So we're typically pretty accurate there based on the assumptions we make. We do assume when we do that every single position will be filled. And that's really important. I'll mention why that's important here in just a second. We do that because we have no idea who's going to terminate or quit or resign between now and the end of 2027. So we don't make that assumption specifically. So we assume all our positions are filled. And then the last thing we do is we look at everything else, all our contracts, all our commodities, and a variety of influences on those. We're working through that right now. That's a lot more time-consuming, a lot more detailed. So we will continue to work on that as we go forward. So let's talk about the two key assumptions on salaries and wages. I mentioned that we use the contract provisions that we have. We generally have 3 bargaining units that impact the general fund. 2 of those are under contract through 2026. That's very helpful for us for projection purposes. We don't have to estimate, we know pretty much exactly what wage rates are going to be. So that gives us a high degree of certainty in our forecast for that wage base. One unit will expire at the end of this year, so we have 2 years of uncertainty with that one particular unit. So what we're going to do is we're going to make an assumption on what wage growth is going to be when those contracts expire. Again, that is just an assumption for planning purposes. And we generally have a more conservative assumption than what wage rates have been in the past. As I noted in the past, we spent a lot of time and energy on addressing inflationary concerns and comparability concerns. I think we largely achieved that objective. And so our assumption is that wage rates will moderate to a more normative level in the future. And I'll show you that in a second. Let me introduce to you the concept of shrinkage. I mentioned that we budget to fill 100% of all our positions. We know that is not going to happen. It's not true today, for example. So we know that. Again, we don't know who's going to terminate when, but we know based on historical norms, generally what our turnover rate is and what we generate. And then we're going to customize that a little bit based on what we know today, which is the number of vacancies we have today. Shrinkage is a very important assumption that we make. If we guess too high, then we come at the end of the year and I tell you that we have a deficit. We overestimated the amount of turnover. Or, like what I told you last week, we tell you we underestimated the amount of shrinkage. We had more turnover, we were less successful in filling positions, and we overshrunk, which is fundamentally part of the message that I provided to you last week. So those are the 2 key assumptions. We'll continually look at shrinkage. We'll continually consider the appropriate amount for employee compensation when our contracts expire. But those are really what are going to drive our expenditure forecast in a macro sense. So you can see here, we expect our expenditure base to be smaller than what it was, particularly in 2025 and 26. I think in 27, what you're seeing is just the uncertainty by not having contracts in place and some of our assumptions on what those contracts may be. Again, that's a couple years down the road based on a lot of assumptions, but it's at this point, it's the best we can do. We'll continue to tweak that. But the good news is we think our expenditure base will be smaller than what we thought last year. This is just the detail on that. What you're seeing on the top line there, the FOP contract was basically front-loaded into 25. That's why the impact's a little bit greater in 25 than in 26. And in 27, what you're seeing is what I mentioned to you. That's not the total amount, but what's influencing that number up is what our assumptions are for settlement amounts in that year. Shrinkage, you'll see we are increasing shrinkage. Again, that's to be more in line to what we think is going to occur. And you can see it's significantly higher in 25. That's because we know where our starting point is. We know what our vacancy level is now. And Elizabeth was telling me that just a couple days ago, and if I recall correctly what she told me, our positions filled are only marginally different than what they were most of last year, which is really not where we want to be, but it is where we are. So because of that, we think we will overshrink this year, so we've adjusted our estimate to reflect that. That's also indicative of a lot of stuff that we've talked about and stuff that the manager's going to talk about next, and that's all the initiatives that we have going on. We're doing everything we can to accelerate those to the degree possible, and that probably will contribute to some under expenditures there. So the long and short of it is that number is increased, which hopefully will mean that when I come to you a year from now and report to you results for this year, I won't tell you that we underspent by $6 million or so because that we underestimated our turnover savings. So this is the elevator speech version of everything I just told you. We think fines and penalties are systemically lower, which is a bad thing, but we think interest earnings and AV growth will more than offset that, at least in the next couple years. We think our wage base expansion will be manageable in a couple years, but that's again based on what we assume for shrinkage estimates and what we assume for contract settlements in the out years. So this is my disclaimer slide, I guess. This is to tell you the things that we continue to look at. And as I mentioned, this forecast will change. Here are probably some of the reasons it might change, maybe to the positive, maybe to the negative. We'll continue to monitor our ability to fill positions and make adjustments there as we think necessary. Again, our objective is accuracy. And the more data points we have, generally the more accurate we can become. So we'll monitor our position fill trends throughout this year, through the months. Again, you know, if settlements actually occur that are higher than the amount that we budget, that'll obviously have an influence on what our expenditure base will be in those out years. Property tax growth, again, I'm just giving you our interpretation of what we've heard from the county. I won't know for sure until June 15th. So, you know, ultimately their valuation growth may be more, may be less than what we presented here today. I think we're probably pretty close to the ballpark, could even be a little on the conservative side. So I think our risk is probably on the upside and not the downside, but again, I won't know that until June. We monitor the economy, I mentioned that, particularly sales tax, so we'll keep an eye on sales tax and see what happens there. I doubt if a whole lot will change between now and May or June when we lock in, but you know, in the environment we're in, who knows? And obviously we'll keep an eye on monetary policy, i.e. specifically what the Federal Reserve does. That has a pretty direct correlation to what we can invest in, since they typically change the short-term end of the curve, and that's typically where we live on our investment portfolio. So here's a slide you've probably been waiting for. This puts it all together. Maybe I should have let off with this slide, but I was afraid if I did that, maybe you wouldn't pay attention to the last 18 slides if you knew the summary from the get-go. So this is where we think we're going to be now. The good news is it's materially better than what we thought last August for the reasons that I previously identified. We continue to believe this year will be balanced. We think that we'll be pretty close to being balanced in 26 for the adjustments that I noted. And you'll see that our gap in 27 will be materially different than what we had initially thought. Initially, we thought somewhere in the $9 million range. Today, I would tell you maybe closer to the $5 million range. Again, we still are structurally imbalanced. If I kept that chart going out further, you're not going to see that gap narrow. You're going to see it widen. But the takeaway is our position is improving, which is really good. That's the end of my forecast portion. I'm just going to wrap up with a couple really quick slides here to tell you a few other things that will impact our ability to produce the budget this year. First is the revenue neutral rate, or what we call the R&R, which is our current budget law, that we have to abide by. That means that we have until July 20th to tell the county whether we choose to exceed that R&R, which we have done here in the city for the last few years. In fact, most municipalities in the state of Kansas exceed the R&R. That's because, just a reminder, the R&R means that we cannot levy $1 more than we levied the previous year. If we levy $1 more than what we levied the previous year, we exceed the R&R. So it's a very incredibly high bar to achieve. Like I say, most municipalities have not been able to achieve that bar, and so most of them choose to exceed the R&R. Just a ballpark estimate of where we're at today. If we do not exceed the R&R, that's roughly $10 million that we would not have in our revenue portfolio in 2026. And just a reminder, that generally compounds forever because it's going to reduce our taxes levied base. So really, it's $10 million annually every year from 2026 into infinity. So not exceeding the R&R, would significantly reduce our revenue portfolio. Just a reminder, based on our assessed valuation base, which by the way is about $5 billion, every 1% of assessed valuation growth is in the ballpark of about 1.6 neighborhood million dollars. It's a very complicated calculation, and I'm giving you the ultra simplified version, but generally speaking, each 1% in assessed valuation growth is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.6 million. Finally, as I noted before on sales tax, anything we do on the property tax side influences our sales tax collections as it does all our peer cities in Sedgwick County as well as the county itself. Not to the magnitude of the $10 million, but it will have an impact on our sales tax revenues because it'll decrease our percentage of the countywide levy or the countywide sales tax. So tentatively, here's what we think the calendar looks like. We would expect to have potentially workshops the next 3 months. I mentioned our assessed valuation estimate will come in June. That's very key. We typically make last-minute adjustments when that occurs because it's a significant revenue stream for us. July 15th is when the city manager is scheduled to present the proposed budget. We do that on July 15th because, as I noted, by July 20th, we have to provide guidance to the county clerk on what our intentions are on R&R. So we have to have that first budget hearing prior to July 20th, and that July 15th is the Tuesday prior to July 20th. We would expect to have 2 more budget hearings, one of which would be an evening meeting. We still have the date a little bit tentative on that, but we will plan on 2 budget hearings, one of which will be an evening meeting. And finally, at this point, our scheduled adoption of the budget is on August 26th. That's when that will occur. So what are our next steps? Again, we continue to analyze, scrub everything. We continue to refine what we're doing. That is an ongoing process, and we continue that literally through June. So we're at the front end of that process. We'll continue to do that, and that'll cause variability in the forecast that I gave you today. We'll work with departments on the expenditure side, again, reviewing their needs and making sure that what we have are appropriate amounts for them to achieve their organizational objectives. But probably the most important next step, I would tell you, is the strategic prioritization and the initiative implementation strategy. That's what will allow us to constrict our base or realign our base so that we can avoid some structural problems that we have potentially down the road. And that's, I think, kind of ties into what the manager is going to present next on the initiatives. That's the end of my presentation. I know I threw a lot of information out at you. The short takeaway is our positioning is improved. Long term, we still have structural challenges, but in the short term, next couple of years, we think we're in materially better position than what we were last August. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Questions for Mark?
Mark, and I guess maybe city manager or assistant city managers, it talks here about the reappraisal, 4.4%, 3.9%, slide 6. What's the status of the constitutional amendment with the state? Because I know they were talking between 4% and 5%. They were also talking a rolling 3-year average. So are there any concerns with that constitutional amendment? I guess what the current status is on it, what does it look like as far as what the state is proposing?
I don't think there's any doubt that if either of those pass, it will reflect a reduction in what we're assuming here. Again, this is based on current law. Both of those, you know, it depends. I'd have to do the math, but based on what I've calculated preliminarily, I think one proposal was to cap it at 3%, if I remember correctly. Obviously, that's lower than what we have assumed here. The average, you know, I'd have to remodel that, but I would tell you that it's most likely going to be lower than what the amounts are here.
Okay, and that would have to also go to the public for a vote after they pass that, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. I'm not an expert on implementation date, but in all likelihood, it will not impact your '26 budget, but it could impact your '27 budget if it were to be adopted by the legislature and then taken out to a public vote.
Okay, thank you.
And I just realized I forgot to mention one key thing I wanted to communicate on this slide. When we talk about reappraisal growth, recognize that we are talking about the entire existing tax base. That's 125,000 or so residential parcels, and it's even more commercial parcels. I'm not sure the number on the commercial side, but this literally is an average of the varying growth patterns for 165,000 individual properties. This does not mean that every single homeowner in Wichita's assessed valuation is going to go up 4.4%, for example. It doesn't mean that if we keep our mill levy flat, that every single homeowner in Wichita will see a 4.4 increase in their property taxes. What it means is, on average, the assessed valuation will go up 4.4%. Every single individual's literally will be different depending on if their house appreciates or depreciates and the degree they're in. So.
Mark, the news is reporting a 9% increase for valuations across Sedgwick County.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
I think what they said is that 87% of residential properties are going to increase an average of 9%, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Which is different than saying 9% overall, and that infers that 13% are either going to stay flat or decrease.
Or go down.
You've identified correctly the challenge that I have in trying to interpret what the county has provided. And same on the commercial side. I think it was even higher on the commercial side. I can't remember the percentage. I think it was 11% growth in 50% of the commercial properties, if I remember correctly. You're right. That means our AV is probably going to be materially higher, but it's not enough information for me to tell you what that growth is going to be. again, there's a variety of other factors involved, so.
In that same presentation of the commission, there was a question from one of the commissioners, and if I remember the response, that about 50% of the appeals are upheld through their process. So I think what you're seeing would be the maximum, and as Mark said, it's hard to interpret that even as a 9%, but if there's a significant number of appeals, you'll see a drop, especially on the commercial side.
Okay.
Mark, I have a couple questions. So I remember back during the summertime, and obviously by that point, you've already presented a proposed budget. And one of the things I asked for, and the reason why I did not vote for the budget, was due to not being able to see a second option, which is one that would not fully capture all of the increase in reappraisals. So I would like to know if it would be possible to create two budgets, one that takes your assumptions into account, which is a mill levy of approximately 32.743 mills out of the 115.185 mills that are levied on property owners. So that would take in the full valuation, the increased valuation. I'd like to see a second budget that takes into account the new construction as well as either a cost of living, inflation, or even in this case, if the state asks for like a 3% cap, so that you have two budgets to compare and see what services would look like with a reduction, but really it's in line with what community is asking, which is, well, we do understand that things cost more over time, so there is some inflation, and there's obviously new construction. So take that into account with increasing your budget, but not increasing it to either 6.5% overall or 9% on the extreme. So would you be able to provide two budgets?
Well, let me answer your question this way, Mayor. We constantly, through the budget development process, one of our objectives is to provide options to the city council and to relate those options in terms of how that would impact outputs and how that would align with your strategic priorities. So we typically do that. I don't know that we've actually formulated that into an entire budget plan, but conceptually, we relatively routinely do what you're suggesting. Probably what would make that strategy less laborious for staff would be policy direction earlier, that is what the objective is. It's much easier for us to prepare information like that if we have a sufficient amount of time to do that. But that's how I would answer your question, Mayor.
Mayor, I think the short answer is yes, and I appreciate that conversation today. It's so much easier for us to be able to give you good information now versus an R&R discussion in June. And so what we would do is prepare a base budget with the council's previous assumptions over the last number of years, and then what I'm hearing is bring back as an option to that budget what it would take to get us to CPI or inflation and new construction. So we would calculate what that reduction would be, and we would then bring a supplement in terms of other actions that would be necessary in order to balance that budget. We won't give you two solid documents like that, but it'll give you the kind of input, and frankly, some of the information I'm going to share with you will do that kind of analysis for you. That'll be based on outcomes and on the priorities that you established when you worked at the last workshop on that.
Thank you.
I would like to add, I hate to do it because I don't like adding more work, but I talked to a different part of the community, and I would like to see some options for what it would look like if the mill levy increased by 1 or 2, so we could have that whole conversation with multiple options to see how that would be impacted. We continue to maintain our service levels, but I also hear from people who would love to see opportunities to improve those service levels, and we can't do that at the current rate. So I would love to have that conversation as well.
I think this would be a great opportunity. I know that there's 6 of us, and Councilmember Glasscock was not able to be here today, but he did tell me that he was interested in the CPI/inflation plus new construction. So that's one person in addition to me who would be interested in seeing that option. We can now open it up to see who else would be interested in either the reduction that I'm proposing or an increase in mill levy. And we could have, because I think that it would be very laborious for staff to create 3 different options versus 2 options. So maybe let's have that discussion. Who is interested in increasing the mill levy?
So I think the question is, who is interested in having the most information available to make an informed decision? And we won't know that unless this actual work happens. It's not about saying you want to raise the mill levy 2. I've been very public, I would, or 1 or 2. But as this council's always talked about, having the most information and being able to, as you just said, with your option, be able to see what that would look like. I think it's only fair that us and the public who will be attending all of these workshops, watching and participating, be able to have that information as well. And also, I'm not asking for, again, a document. It's looking at how much that would be revenue-wise for 1 or 2 mills. And then the option package really is just adjustments from work that's already going to happen from what you've requested.
Yeah, I would not favor a mill increase. I'll tell you that. I'm very interested in seeing the option you proposed, taking into account some kind of inflation or cost of living or something like that, plus new construction, see what that budget looks like.
I don't think we're doing all of our homework if we don't look at all the options. So while I'm not sure that I would be in favor of a mill levy, I certainly think it's important to propose all of the facts and all of the different options and sides to the public so that, you know, it sounds scary, but maybe if it's $10 or $15, you know, I know we've talked about it in the past, but what you could get for that $10 or $15 million increase, I think that's something that is owed to the community for us to present all of the sides.
I like to look at options.
So we're down to 3-3. Dalton did say he wanted to see the CPI inflation plus new construction. I'll ask right now.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that we're all in
And we're not
agreement with just
voting. We can't
options,
vote.
yeah.
But it would help. Bob, can you please address that?
Yes. Again, it's just a matter of a short window in order to do this and do it accurately or I'm sorry, I didn't have my, we have a very tight process, and I'm not quite sure how we can give you what you need with 3 different options. I know so much focus will be on trying to maintain service levels and meet the council's priorities with the existing policy that's been in place. And I'm sorry, just to be candid, because of the amount of work, if the council is not going to approve an increase in the mill, then it becomes an exercise to look at options. But if you're not going to seriously consider those options, it takes time away from the rest of the budget process. So that's my only issue. If you believe that there could be a possibility of some increase, then of course we're here to serve and we'll do that. But it's going to take a lot of work, I think, to try to get to this other option as well as our base budget. And it's a whole different thought process in terms of what we would do if there was additional revenue and how that would, what those priorities are for the council. It would require a lot more feedback from you during this process. So it makes it complex. But one thing, let's decide today, because again, we're scrambling and we'll not be able to give you good information the later we get into the process.
I'll just make a statement. We're not voting, we can't, right? So we need to make that clear. This is just comments, and then staff can infer what they want from that. At this point, I would not be interested in a discussion on a mill levy increase, especially because we do not know what's going to happen at the state. And I heard some information yesterday that I chatted with the manager about that was really alarming in terms of potential caps that could influence our budget significantly. So at this point, I would not be interested in learning more about a mill levy increase. But again, this is not a vote. This is just a conversation.
Right.
I'll also go on record and say affirmatively, I will not support a budget that does not exceed the revenue neutral rate. So this option that was requested is not one I will support. I'm happy to look at the information because I like to be informed. But if we go forward and we are looking at trying to not exceed the revenue neutral rate, I will not be supportive of that.
And let me clarify, I have not heard any direction that we try to adhere to the R&R. What I heard was our base budget and then also a CPI and new construction growth.
I will clarify anything that does not take in all of it.
All
I
the
am
R&R,
not supportive of.
Got it.
Thank you for that robust conversation. And Mark, I just wanted to double check. In our budget book, it shows the 115 mills that are levied. Only 28.4% of the total really is the city of Wichita. The next, actually the highest is actually USD 259 at 45.1%. Then it's city of Wichita at 28.4%. Sedgwick County is 23.9%. WSU is 1.3%, and the state is 1.3%. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. The city, to use round numbers, the school district's roughly half, the county and the city are roughly quarters. You put a finer point on it, but that's generally where it's at.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Does that provide enough direction for staff?
I think so.
I think the manager mentioned this, but I wanted to reiterate, he's correct. Under what you've suggested, you still would exceed the revenue neutral rate, you just wouldn't capture all the growth, yeah. That's it.
Correct. It would still be an increase in, exceed the revenue neutral rate, but not capture the full growth.
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
I would also like to highlight that it then begins to set the example that we are not investing in ourselves at a level that we could, and that has been one of the challenges that we have faced as a city by not investing in ourselves, not only in local government, but in other ways as well, and to work to improve service levels and provide what we really need for those who are spending their time day in and day out for the city. We know that salaries are going to continue to need to go up to be competitive, and all of our service levels truly will be there at some point. People will begin to say, like just like with street sweeping, why is my street not being swept the 3-4 times a year it was? Those things are going to come, those things are going to cost, and the more time we spend just trying to adhere to doing the least that we can instead of recognizing that we really need to make more of an investment, the harder it's going to be for future councils, because we continue to talk about similar dollar amounts. And again, I think that if we're not looking at an opportunity to increase, then we're going to have some challenges in the future.
Mayor, if I can, one thing I will point out, a reminder from Mark's slides, 2027 still shows a structural deficit. So if you want to have a discussion about service level erosion, you're going to have, in just getting to our normal basic budget, you're going to have some tough decisions to discuss on what it would take within our defined revenue. So I think it does let you then talk about those service level changes and whether or not that is too much. So, I mean, I think you can get to where you want to go without us doing an artificial construct about what would happen if we had additional mill.
So it could just be a asterisk that says 1 mill is an additional $5 million, 2 mills is an additional 10. And as we look at this deficit, we know if we raise the mill, we wouldn't have that structural issue in 26, 27. So it helps. So even just having an asterisk there.
Right, and we'll have to highlight what all of those actions that will take us just even to balance the basic budget. Yep. So that could tee that discussion.
I'd be happy with that. I just want the public to know that there is an opportunity to not have to make the decisions like that, and we can continue to improve service levels.
Thank you for the discussion. This has been very helpful to us. So let's talk about one of the issues that's influencing the financial projections that Mark just shared with you. At the end of the budget process last year, you asked us to work on some interim projects so that we could get a running start on what we knew were going to be structural deficit issues for both 26 and 27. And what we said is we would look at 10 different projects to see if we could start to make some changes. Most of them are centered around departments and operations that have had struggles or challenges in being fully staffed over the last few years. So we have these 10 projects that are going on, and the issue is to look at staffing, equipment, and operational issues in each of these operations. Before I go any further, I want to thank staff for the significant work that they have done. In each of these service areas, the 5 I'm going to show with you now, they looked at a number of options, and all of the options and the recommendations are based on outcomes. And so we can tell you, I have a stack of reports that are about that thick that can talk about all of the outcome impacts from the options. I'm not going to share those with you today because you're going to get lost in all that. You have an attached report that I think focuses more on outcomes for the recommended options, but we have that same kind of data for those options that were also considered but not recommended. So I'm going to just jump right into it. And we have subject matter experts from each of the departments that were involved in this process. The first one has to do with municipal court. Mark talked about a drop in revenue in court, which is then translated into a drop in activity. And so what we looked at were 3 different options. If we did something with our, kind of locked in our current staffing, because we've had some staffing challenges, but also, as I said, some workload changes. We looked at what if we maintained a budget that had full staffing and maybe shifted the resources, and the third is what if we further reduce staff. Our recommended option is that we would eliminate a docket clerk and 2 clerk positions because of a drop in work activity, and we would lock in some salary savings or shrinkage that has been built in the budget before, and this would now become a permanent part of the budget. We'd also reduce about $100,000 from the professional services budget because we're having decreased collection activity. So as we're recommending it in 2025, we would come in with about $263,000 in savings from municipal court operations.
Bob, can I ask you a question? Why
Yes.
are we seeing a decrease in municipal court?
Okay, I don't want to speak for the chief, but there has been a change in philosophy over the last several years in terms of traffic enforcement primarily by the police department. It's a greater focus on property crimes and on personal crimes and proactive policing instead of reactive policing. So most of our traffic enforcement has focused on areas of high accidents or where they know that safety is jeopardized by high speeding. So it's a much more targeted enforcement, not as broad as we had in maybe 10 years ago. So we have seen a steady decline over the last several years in that revenue source. A much bigger change in the last year or two. Many more warning tickets that are given, trying to actually recognize some of the adverse impact from writing traffic tickets, especially in places where it doesn't seem to be as justified or it's just spot enforcement.
And I appreciate that. Thank you so much for the response. I just, my concern is if there in the future becomes a change in philosophy of that model, then where does that put us? So go ahead and go. Does that make sense?
No, I'm not quite sure because our staffing, we still have a traffic unit. It's just a matter of how they do their enforcement work and where the chief assigns members of the department. And I think he's decided that there are areas that are higher priority for residents and probably higher priorities for the department where we can make better impact on our crime statistics. by focusing on those and pulling it maybe a little away from a heavy traffic enforcement. Now, we still have to look at keeping people safe. So we haven't ignored traffic safety.
Sure.
But in the future, if they were to say, oh, we've gone too far, we can always make that adjustment. Of course, that revenue, we always have the ability to add positions to municipal court to process additional
That's just what I wanted
tickets,
to
if
make sure.
that's what you're asking.
Yes, like heaven forbid if Chief Sullivan won the lottery and left and we had a new chief and that wasn't their philosophy. I just want to make sure we have the flexibility built in to be able to address that.
Well,
So
the good
thank
news is you have the additional revenue to be able to pay for
That's,
those
yeah,
positions.
that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Yep.
Have we ran this by Judge Jones, and does Judge Jones feel like this is okay?
Judge Jones doesn't control the operations, the actual administration of the court, but Nathan, have you had discussions with the
Nathan,
judge?
I haven't, but what I'll say is that the docket clerk and the 2 clerk positions are actually savings through benchmark and through our process changes. And so regardless of whether there's an uptick in actual ticket writing, these are not positions that would be impacted by that. The big impact on ticket writing would be that $100,000 that we're reducing from professional services that relate directly to monies that we're not paying a collections agency because they're not bringing in those revenues. So this really is capturing some of our process improvements and areas we identified that are improving in due to technology. And then the $100,000 reflects that reduction in collections.
Nathan, thanks for the clarification. And I'm jumping ahead of myself, but we're also going to have an opportunity in the future when the new police record system comes on. It will have impact in the court as well. And so we have probably another opportunity to reorganize and probably reduce staff because of the benefits that we realize through that technology.
Thank you, Doctor.
And this talks about that, and looking in 26 and 27 as Axon project moves forward. We believe that we can maintain the service levels as they currently exist in the court, so don't see a real significant controversy in this recommendation. We did look at what if we maintain the existing budget as it is. The recommendation that came from the municipal court team was they would like to have a position that would be a grant writer and grant administrator that would allow the courts to take greater advantage of opportunities for funding from outside sources. I will tell you that we're looking at this on a citywide level in response to some questions that have come from council members in the past. We're doing a cost benefit of creating a grant position for the organization. And so, again, not recommending option 2 here. And then the last one is what if we took staffing down even further? That would have an impact on our customer service work, and it would produce significant savings from $345,000 roughly to $460,000, but it would have these kinds of impacts. You could have call wait times that would jump from less than a minute to up to 5 minutes, depending on how many positions you eliminated. You'd have increased call abandonment rates, and you'd have increased lobby wait times. Those are all things that we had previously, and we've not always been successful in the past in being able to move people quickly through the courts. But over the last several years, we've seen improved service levels, and so we're not recommending this option because we really we don't want to inconvenience those in municipal court after we made this much progress and being able to accommodate, I think, in a way that we get great compliments from people going through the court system. And as you know, they don't want to be in the court system anyway, and so I think we're serving the public well. So that was it on municipal court. And I will tell you, unless I hear from you, I'm probably going to be moving forward with these recommendations so we can get them implemented in 2025 and hopefully early in 2025, again, to have the impact that Mark had talked about in his previous presentation, because we've built many of these into our projections for 25, 26, and 27. Next one has to do with park and recreation maintenance. Now, this one's a touchy one because it impacts a service, or could impact service areas that you've had a lot of discussion about over the last couple of years, especially forestry. And so we think we have an option that will allow us to reduce cost, recognize what's going on, especially because of our drought, and realize some savings or lock some savings in. The first one has us adjusting our mowing cycle for non-park ground. I'll talk about that in a second. Another one would eliminate current open positions and maintain service levels that we have, but you have not been satisfied with those service levels, so when I show you the impact, I think we were right in not recommending that option. And then the third one also would impact tree and stump removal, which, again, I think the council has expressed concerns about in the past. So what we're recommending as this option is that we would increase our non-park mowing cycles from 14 days to 21 days, and where we currently have a 14-day cycle, and where we have a 50-day cycle, we'd go to a 70-day cycle. We believe we can save about $260,000 by going to the new cycles. We don't think we're going to have significant changes, especially while we're in the drought. We're not irrigating. These are mostly rights of way, and as I said, other spaces that are not park and not heavily utilized by our public. Our second option was eliminating 6 positions that are currently open, and it's in forestry and park maintenance. We could produce about a $287,000 savings, but it would increase the time to close service requests and increase the time for tree removal, which again is not consistent with what I've heard from the council previously. And then the third would eliminate a $250,000 contract we have for tree and stump removal. I don't need to explain the impact that would have on increasing backlog. So at this point, I'm assuming that I'm not going to get a thumbs up for either options 2 or 3, and so but we are comfortable at this point with recommending option 1 and proceeding in that direction. The third item is a little different in that this is a cost recovery issue. It has to do with increasing our cost recovery for our planning fees. And this was discussed in the last budget, but we've had some pushback from the development community over a 10% increase that we recommended that be implemented in '25. What we'd like to do is get a process established so that we don't have to come to you on a periodic basis and get increases, but you approve a policy that allows us to recover cost at a certain level and then increase it every year based on CPI. It's not a lot of money. It's $34,000 in increased revenue that we would get from that 10% fee. We will currently get somewhere between $400,000 and $425,000 in fees, which is only today about 25% of cost recovery. We'd like to get to about 28%, and that's shown here on the slide. The last time our fees were increased was 2018.
Since we talked about cost recovery just a few minutes ago on the golf cart issue, can you explain why cost recovery is not higher?
Because of pushback, I want to be fair, concerns expressed by the development community and the feeling that those costs ultimately get passed on to a consumer, to someone who's buying a property or leasing a property. And the council has always said that given, and let me come back to this, the cost recovery pyramid, that there was a certain public purpose being represented here that the council didn't want to go to full cost recovery. So that's why we've hovered around this 25%. But I will point down to the last bullet point, in that our actual cost for processing applications is $1.5 million. So we don't believe that we're being overly aggressive just to inch up from 25% to 28%. But again, the development community has pushed back, specifically the home builders, indicating that the market is down, and as a result of that, they don't want to see additional costs added to them at this point. And I just want to be fair in representing that that's their position. I'm still making the recommendation that we at least increase our cost recovery a little bit. I think according to our recovery model, we should be at least at 30%, and that's what at one point I was looking at trying to be that 30 to 50%, but that would be a significant increase from where we are today. And again, I'd love to have council guidance on what you think is fair and whether or not we do it at one time or over a period of time. And that's why, again, a process approved by the council would be helpful to us and to the development community.
I think we should have a discussion. I believe that it would be prudent to have either a town hall and have the development community and also provide these facts of it costs an estimated $1.5 million, and how much are we receiving each year? Roughly $400,000. So we're not cost recovering, which then the reason why we're not cost recovering is because we do want development to happen. I think housing was one of the top 4 things that community survey said we need to focus on, housing/homelessness. And so I'm kind of concerned about the cost recovery portion. I want to be a good partner, but at the same time, at what expense? And if people know clearly that they're getting a great partnership because we're trying to increase housing in our community, I think people need to know that. But I don't like not having cost recovery at a level where we're able to even just pay the staff member that processes this information. Another one that I would also challenge is, are there any technology enhancements that could help with that? Courts did that, and so are there any opportunities on the technology side?
I think we have done a lot to allow for electronic filings. If you want to get into that, Scott, I don't, or we can bring that back. Mayor, one of the things I think would be a helpful discussion is not having this fee in isolation, but you talked about a housing strategy. And so I anticipated later this year, we would talk about what our role is going to be in creating greater opportunities for affordable housing. And that could be fee reductions or waivers in some cases, but it's in a targeted way that is defined by the council. You may want to focus simply on our core or our redevelopment areas and say we were willing to do this in order to encourage residential development in these areas, but we want to go closer to cost recovery in other parts of the community. But that'll be your that'll be your policy discussion.
Hey, Bob, 2 quick questions. One, if it's a 5% increase, do we have like an average that would cost an applicant per project?
Yes. Scott?
We don't have a specific average. We have a variety of fees, and so our fee schedule is fairly long because you have conditional uses, you have vacations, you have variances, all these things. So we have an actual fee list that we can show you what the impact would be of increasing. On fees, we round that up to the nearest $5 increment, either down or up, depending on where it lands, just to make it easier for the transaction. Just as simply taking cash or a check, calculate it out, it just makes it easier.
We don't take pennies anymore, right?
Well, we still have to, but I prefer not to. It's kind of complicated.
Appreciate that. And second question is, you talked about 30%, kind of the target. Is that what most like communities do, is around 30%, or is there kind of a standard that we're looking at here?
I think we're a little unique in terms of talking about cost recovery and using the pyramid model. I know other cities do it, but I think with the comparable cities that we looked at, I don't know that they have a defined policy, either the Kansas cities, Tulsa or Oklahoma City, or Omaha for that matter. Scott?
I would just add that we are doing research, contacting those communities. It's been a little bit tricky because we're asking not only for how much are their fees, how many cases they process, what their staffing levels are. So we're collecting that variety of information. Some of them get back to us quite quickly. There's been a handful that have done that, but others have taken quite some time. So we're very reliant on them to respond back to us. But we're in the process of collecting some of that information.
So I think the guidance here is maybe not jump into the 10% increase immediately, but make sure we have an opportunity for dialogue with the development community, but more importantly, talk about an overall strategy on our role in housing. Is that accurate, or do you want us to move forward with the 10% and then start that discussion?
I think moving forward with an increase, but then having further discussion, because again, it concerned me knowing that we're not cost recovering, and I understand the reason. We want to encourage development, but I don't believe that to the extent that it currently is. So we do have to have a greater conversation with the development community and local government. Again, I just want to make sure that we're paying the staff that needs to be paid to make sure that this happens, but at the same time, we're still encouraging the development that we need, because we still need new growth and we still need construction in our community. We just saw it from Mark's presentation. So I feel like there's a balance and we need to have everyone at the table.
You don't have to decide today, because I believe it takes an ordinance in order to lock into these new fees, so we'll bring that forward to you.
I just wanted to highlight, Councilmember Johnson and I had the opportunity to participate in a meeting with some developers about an unrelated topic, and Assistant City Manager Troy Anderson was there as well. And one of the things that they were hoping to see, and we agreed, I think, and some discussions will need to happen, is the city, because it's one of the in the 4 top priorities of the community survey is affordable housing / homelessness, housing that's affordable. Troy's trained me well, to be able to come up with some sort of maybe longer term strategic plan for housing in our community. And the developers want to be involved in that conversation to be a good partner. And this could be an opportunity to weave this into that as well.
I just wanted to add, I agree with the mayor. I think we should go forward with both and definitely have the conversation, but we got to do something.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So let's talk about Public Works and Utilities Facilities Division. They are responsible for maintaining all of our facilities. We have 3 options that we looked at. The one that we're recommending is an adjustment on our custodial levels, both in-house and what we contract with outside providers. The second one had to do with one that actually, and that's only on custodial. The second one is a mix of a change in custodial levels, but also a change in our maintenance approach in the buildings, which includes regular inspections and repairs, which I think goes against what the council wants us to do in terms of preventative maintenance and maintaining our existing assets. And the third one is a mix on that as well. So I will let you know that what we're looking at is eliminating 3 vacant custodial positions that we have and reducing our custodial contracts in order to save about $387,000 in '25 and over $500,000 in '26. It's really going to have a minimal impact on our critical work, because again, what it'll mean is garbage cans are going to be empty maybe a day or 2 less than they are right now. We have a list of other custodial services that will be at a little less service, but it recognizes that we haven't been able to meet our standards that were created for these buildings because we haven't been able to fill the positions and keep them full. So we're basically going to lock in at a current service level. And I personally have not received, nor has our staff received, many complaints regarding those service levels in this building. So we would lock in savings that has actually been created over the last few years by our inability to keep a constant staffing level. Option 2, and I'm not going to spend much time on options 2 and 3, we would have had reduced heating and cooling maintenance at some of our facilities. We would have reduced inspections of our buildings and spot repairs and maintenance, everyday maintenance. And we could have had additional savings, but when you look at that, we would lose an HVAC mechanic and some other maintenance positions. And the same would go with option 3. So unless I hear otherwise, we believe the prudent thing to do is adjust custodial levels, adjust expectations a little bit with our staff, and still be able to realize up to $500,000 savings by '26. And the last one, which I don't expect you to necessarily jump on this today, but I wanted to share with you, a lot of work went into looking at this option or looking at this area, and that is recognizing that we have had a challenge on staffing for, again, few years in street maintenance. We have an optimum level of service. We have what our current level of service is, and then we have the resulting levels of service from each of our options. our recommendation is to eliminate 9 positions in the street maintenance division. 6 of those are currently vacant. And we're targeting about a $600,000 savings each of the next 2 years if we do this. What we would want to do is to preserve as much as possible our current service levels in pavement maintenance, lane markings, and traffic signal maintenance. In order to do that, shifting staff around and recognizing what we can do in terms of filling positions, we would see some erosion of service in terms of our street sweeping programs, a slowdown in graffiti removal and litter removal, and then a very almost not noticed change in our service level for snow removal, with the upside being 13 hours instead of 12 hours to complete a cycle. So that would result in about a $600,000 savings. Now, again, we understand street maintenance is a high priority for our residents, and so we're trying to keep from getting into areas where we're reducing the number of potholes that would be filled and all of the other things that I think people associate with our day-to-day street maintenance activities.
So what happened to the 3 positions that are filled?
We'll wait until those positions become vacant. In other words, we would not lay anyone off under this plan in '25. We believe between now and the end of the year, we'll have vacant positions that we would just freeze and not fill.
Bob, can I ask a question? And maybe I should let you go through it, but street maintenance we know is in the top 4 priorities according to the community survey. It's what the community thinks is really important, but we're not doing it maybe especially well. So will OP3 be impacted by this at all? Okay.
No. Good question. That's a great question. No, OP3 would not. This is just the work we do with our crews on a daily basis. If you want an idea about service levels, if you go to the attached report, there are like 3 or 4 pages of service level data, and that will give you an idea, again, as I indicated, what our desired at full staffing levels are, what our current service levels are, and the impact of adopting this option. And you'll see that even in some cases, we're going to be under what we're recommending, we'll actually do better than we're currently doing because we're putting more resources into some areas that would allow us to get to optimum. But what we sacrifice then will be the current service levels in street sweeping. It's not that we're not doing them, but we're going to change the cycles in street sweeping and the graffiti and litter removal areas.
Thank you.
I am 100% against this. I get dinged on this all the time in my district. Graffiti removal, South Broadway, litter removal, once a month and once every 3 months. That's the cleanliness of our community. Street sweeping, what we used to do every 6 months, and now we're going to talk about every 12 to 18 months. I hear that all the time at my neighborhood association meetings. Yeah, I'm against this one.
Again, that's why I told you this one would be, I wouldn't be implementing it. Yeah. Well, to make this one look better, let me show you the other options. Option 2 would reduce service levels across the division. Option 3 targets street sweeping even more. And then the 4th one is a mix of street sweeping and shifting some maintenance expenses over to the CIP, which is really just, it's a financing mechanism and moves it out of the operating budget, but we still have to pay for it. Just so you get a feel for what this would mean, the option 2 eliminates 12 positions. I'm not going to go through all of this, but here's an idea. When you do a balanced approach, now you're reducing repairs of paved streets, pothole, curb and gutter, unpaved street repair. None of this we knew would be acceptable to you or to the public, so I'm not going to spend time on that. The same in terms of going deeper in terms of street sweeping cuts and what we had an option for. So I guess what I need, before I go into the last slide, what I needed to hear is from others about adjustments. Is this hands-off? Do you want to see a smaller reduction that at least gets us to the service levels that exist today? Because I'm not confident I'm going to be able to hire staff to be able to get to the optimum. We haven't been able for 2 years. So then are we more targeted in what we preserve and what we recognize we can't do? If you go to that second column, we could maybe tailor our work to what we're getting done now. That will result in some savings, and I'll be able to lock in on savings that currently we're just realizing through our shrinkage.
At the very least, I think we need to maintain current levels, at the very least.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I mean, why are we having such a hard time hiring? Is it because we can't get competitive with wages, or, I mean, what is the problem?
Well, I think it depends who you talk to. I think you have a limited market. We have increased wages significantly through the SEIU contract to try to become more competitive, but it's, in some cases, we're able to hire, but we don't retain, and in other cases, the market just isn't that significant in terms of the number of people that are available for the work that we're doing.
I mean, I'm with Mike. I think we have to stay at least where we are. And like he said, I'm constantly getting dinged for graffiti that is all over downtown. They do a great job in the parks and the bridges and stuff, but, you know, on the side of the Crest building, it's been there for like 9 months. The littering, you know, all the way up and on Broadway, I mean, there's no way we can reduce, in my opinion. And it's the core, it's what everybody sees, and the graffiti is what they see, the trash is what they see. Yeah.
Okay.
That's enough for me.
I am in agreement with maintaining where we are.
Okay, so if we bring any savings to you, it'll be because we're locking in what has been salary savings over the last few years. Okay.
Or increasing the mill levy.
I also think that right now we're only looking at certain departments. What are other departments that could see savings? Knowing full-heartedly that the community-wide survey specifically said crime prevention, street repair, economic development, and also housing/homelessness, targeting one of the major portions of the community survey seems a little off.
Well, we brought that forward to you back at the end of the year because we knew we were consistently having shortages in staffing. And so at that point, it was why budget at the full optimum level when we know that there's going to be some savings. So we're just trying to lock in that savings. We were trying to emphasize street maintenance to maybe to the exclusion of some others or a reduction in other service levels. Like I said, a lot of time and effort went into this, trying to determine what's in the best interest of the community. Let me answer your question in two ways. First of all, there's still 5 more projects that we identified for you that are interim projects that are ongoing right now. Excuse me, sorry, this was the savings. If you had accepted the option on street maintenance, we would have had about a $1.5 million savings as a result of just these 5 projects. That'll be reduced as we make the modifications. These are the projects that are still ongoing. The accounts payable and accounts receivable function moving to the finance department and out of each of the specific departments. We think that will result in a pretty significant savings, but we're only partway through that work right now. We're doing some things on animal control, dog licensing. We'll bring that back to you. The issue of equitable management model is really talking about our middle level management in the organization and making sure that's right-sized. We also want to make sure that we are right-sizing our fleet. We have looked at fleet operations, and I don't think there's a lot of savings that we can get through that operation because of things they have done over the last several years to use technology and equipment and training to I think, really appropriately address our maintenance needs for our fleet. But we have identified a number of underutilized vehicles that we think we can shed from the fleet, and that will ultimately result in savings in terms of service, but more importantly, in terms of replacements going forward. And the last thing is naming rights, and we're going to be bringing something back regarding that. Now, Mayor, back to the other question about some of the other areas that's all part of our budget process. That's why we brought forward to you that discussion last month. You've now given us guidance through the pillars, through the goals of what it is you want to accomplish. And so as we go through the budget review, we're going to try to hit the places that you've identified as priorities and then look at what can we do differently, probably in terms of service reduction or even service shedding in the areas that don't fit. Because again, I can't address a $5 million structural deficit by trying to do everything that we continue to do today. So that's why it was so important for you to come down with those goals and give us direction on what was important to you. So our recommendation is going to be built around that and how we comply with or adhere to your direction.
I did want to, again, I feel like my comments were a little dismissive, so I want to say I respect all the work that went into that when I said I want to maintain service levels, but for me, a lot of those issues really hit at the heart of the quality of life stuff that I hear about and care about, and especially, I joked about the street sweeping, but I really hear about that now so much. So that was why I said I thought we should maintain or find a way to really impact those things the least possible, but I know a lot of effort went into that, and that was the best of the three options that you presented, but it's just, I feel like we should try our best to maintain that.
Right. Again, we're trying to leave no stone unturned in that regard and see if there are opportunities. And that's why we introduced the 10 projects, and we didn't believe that all of them would come forward with maybe, something that everybody would accept. But I think we're never going to move forward if we don't challenge some past assumptions and the way we're doing business. So, okay.
I'm going to add one more additional comment on options regarding the street maintenance. I know that 2, 3, and 4, I believe,
Yes.
definitely did not have any support whatsoever
Right.
from this council.
Right.
But option 1, these are currently unfilled positions, correct? A majority of them.
6 of the 9 that we recommended, yes.
I would challenge and say that I appreciate seeing that is one of the options. If that could be further explained, I guess, because I feel like since those positions have not been filled, the current service levels are still maintained. So why wouldn't you just take away those 6? If service level right now is acceptable without the 6, why wouldn't you take away the 6?
Mayor, that's probably where we'll be. That's what I'll bring back, is how do we lock in the salary savings that we've been capturing informally? How do we do that formally in this budget and recognize we're going to have that consistent vacancy rate? But again, what I'm hearing is don't shift any resources among the division to cut back on street sweeping or something like that. So we'll probably be focused on the service levels that exist in that second column.
Two things real quick. One, I think a lot of people in the community don't find the current service levels as acceptable, and that's why we get beat up at a lot of the neighborhood meetings and whatnot. Second, what are the 6 open positions?
I'm sorry, I don't have that. Aaron, do you know offhand?
Yeah, I've got it right here.
While Aaron's looking for that, I just wanted to share the sentiments as Councilmember Hoheisel. I mean, without knowing all of the jobs and all the details, it looks like we have 3 people doing 9 people's work. Is that fair to say?
Well, not really. There's, no, because
Or does that mean just work's not being done?
we're just not able to achieve everything that we want to do on our streets. And so, I mean, I can't remember. Aaron, how many staff members do you have in the division?
They're in the division at 115.
So, I mean, so it's whatever's less. I mean, we have 6 vacancies out of those 115. I think there's probably a few other vacant positions depending on what you're looking at. But, so you've got you got over 100 people that are doing that work.
Okay.
We have quite a bit more than just the 6 vacancies right now. The 6 that were identified in that option were 2 EO1s from pavement cleaning specifically, 3 EO3s from pavement cleaning specifically that are currently vacant, and then I believe it was 1 EO1 from pavement maintenance that's currently vacant.
So all of them are from pavement maintenance?
They're all from the street maintenance division. There's 3 sections.
Okay.
Pavement maintenance, pavement cleaning, and signs and signals are the 3 sections in the division.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Mayor, we have one last item. It'll take you 3 minutes. It's a summary of where we are with ARPA.
Okay, I think I need to, is the best way. There we go. Good morning, I'm Elizabeth Goldtree from the Finance Department, and I'm here to provide a quick update on the ARPA recovery plan. Mark presented the quarterly reports last week at your city council meeting, but the ARPA plan was on the schedule for the workshop, and so it seemed like a good opportunity just to provide a brief update of what we were able to achieve in the fourth quarter of last year and, celebrate that success. This pie chart is an update of the final allocations in our City of Wichita ARPA recovery plan, how we allocated the $72.4 million. An initial spending plan was developed in 2021 with the goal of allocating $20 million for negative economic impact initiatives. All told, in the end, over $23 million was allocated in that category. The increase is due to the funding of MAC operations at a total of $5 million. That allocation to the negative economic impacts projects does place some pressure on the CIP because we had initially intended on cash funding more capital projects out of ARPA, but prudently, 0.7 mils was shifted from the general fund to the debt service fund in 2025, so that provides some more capacity, a little more capacity than we had had before. But also as a reminder, I know MAC is top of mind for many people. Infrastructure projects is a category where you'll find the construction projects, the renovation projects related to the MAC. And then this pie chart is a zoom in on the negative economic impact initiatives projects. It includes the MAC funding and then also some small changes, minor adjustments as projects were closed. All told, there were, in the workforce development and small business projects category, there were a total of 24 projects there. At this point, those have been fully expended and we're in the reporting and monitoring phase of those projects. As a part of monitoring, I've been able to visit a number of sites that use funding to purchase capital assets, such as Breakthrough, WIN, and WSU Tech, and it's always inspiring to see the funding being put to use out in the community and how it's impacting residents, particularly in the areas of small business and workforce development. We shared this table with you last time in September. There was a lot of work that happened between September and December in order to obligate all funds. Not only were funds obligated by the end of 2024, there's been additional spending through the end of January. And the current monthly spending, which we monitor, is on track to be fully expended by the end of September 2026. This award has a total of 57 projects, which is more projects than there are cards in a deck. It's a lot of projects. 38 have completed spending, and then there are 14 projects that have some spending, and we're monitoring those. That's the activity that you've seen from September, most of the activity from September to the end of last month. And then there are 5 projects that we're monitoring the timelines for that haven't had expenditures yet, but at this point, we feel that they're on track. So in summary, I know that getting to this point of being fully obligated hasn't been easy. The feedback that we received in September and also your commitment to that November 5th meeting was pretty instrumental in getting all the funds obligated. So the guidance that the City Council provided and the guidance we got from the community starting in 2021, and then having the flexibility to incorporate additional funding for homelessness, it's been pretty incredible that we've continued to address the needs of the community that's in many cases still persist, even though the pandemic is behind us. This will probably be the last presentation that you receive about ARPA, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank to acknowledge other people who you don't see today, but that I work closely with in the finance department. We recognize it's been a unique and weighty responsibility to receive this amount of funding. It's been very unprecedented. And so Josh Lauber, who you see regularly, our purchasing manager, Nikki Babcock, our controller, and then 2 of our grants and projects accountants have been very involved, Amy Belcher and Jordan Miller, as well as Aurora Gonzalez in the budget office. We've all really worked closely as a team, and this is our last presentation. So there's been a lot to it. So it's been a neat project. So, we just want to thank you for your trust and partnership in this process, and we'll continue to report quarterly as funds continue to be spent and we learn more about outcomes. So thank you.
So it's not the last presentation, correct? It's not the last
It's
presentation.
not, we will still report on a quarterly basis, but I think the hard work of the allocations and obligations is behind us. So.
If I could just say also to you and the team members that you mentioned, fine job. This was an opportunity that came out of what was a global issue, but seeing that we aren't returning one penny to the federal government and we have spent it as wisely as we could on the city team, as well as making these strategic investments into the community and doing so much good and not having any issues. I think it says a lot about you all and the team and how incredibly hard that probably was and all the things you had to navigate and then making sure that all of those things happen. So I just want to take my hat off to you all as well. Fine job, and I'm really excited about the work we were able to do as a city team, council and staff in the community. So it was a unique opportunity, but everyone did a great job.
Yeah, I expect, even though I still have a lot of years ahead of me in my career, that I'll still always point to this as being a pretty monumental accomplishment. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's it, Mayor. Thank you.
Have a great day.